Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our warriors.
And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent broadcast for you today. It might look like we're a little light on the ground, but we've got a good show. First, I'll be presenting the news, as I always do. That'll be followed by the report from German aid to Ukraine on that topic. But then we have a special guest this week, which we're very happy to have. Parabellum will be appearing on the show. We're going to have a conversation about the Kursk offensive, and then we'll probably open it up to broader topics after that. So yeah, very happy to see chat here. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. If you have any questions throughout the stream, please feel free to write them in the chat. We'll do our best to address them in the Q&A section towards the end. And yeah, I think it's going to be a good time. So please, like the stream, subscribe to Tochnyi on YouTube. As mentioned, we do have a Blue Sky account. If you guys aren't into Twitter, understandable right now. We also do have a Twitter account. So yeah, just like follow us on social media, spread the word about us on like other social media platforms that we don't use a lot, and definitely get as many people watching the stream today as possible, because we've got an excellent guest we're really excited to talk to. So yeah, I think without any further delay from there, let's go ahead and jump into the news. These are the headlines for the Russian invasion of Ukraine as of November 17th, 2024. In the Kupiansk sector, Russian forces, disguised in uniforms mimicking those of Ukrainian troops, launched an operation to penetrate Ukrainian defensive positions. The incident was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine via Telegram. The assault began in the afternoon and unfolded in 4 waves, with Russian forces deploying approximately 15 pieces of military equipment, including tanks, armored vehicles, and a mine-clearing vehicle. Ukrainian officials emphasized that some Russian soldiers wore uniforms similar to those of Ukrainian forces, a move they described as a violation of wartime laws and customs, classifying it as a war crime. Ukrainian defenders successfully repelled the attack, neutralizing all enemy armored vehicles and inflicting significant losses on enemy personnel. The General Staff credited the outcome to the effective collaboration and expertise of Ukraine's infantry, tank units, artillery teams, and drone operators. President Zelensky has announced that Ukraine is currently testing 4 distinct missile types as part of its ongoing missile program. The development is aimed at enhancing the nation's self-defense capabilities, particularly in response to threats such as the Shahed attack drones. In addition to missile advancements, according to the president, Ukraine has made significant progress with naval drones. These drones have transitioned from testing phases to active deployment, successfully targeting and destroying a substantial portion of Russia's Black Sea fleet. The president also explained that earlier this year, Ukraine produced its first 100 missile units and plans to increase production in the coming year. On the night of November 9th, a Russian Mi-24 attack helicopter was destroyed at the Klin 5 airfield in Moscow Oblast, according to Ukraine's main intelligence directorate. The helicopter belonged to the 92nd Squadron of the 344th Center for Combat Application and Retraining of Army Aviation Flight Personnel of the Russian Armed Forces. That is a Russian combat unit name if I've ever heard one. Or released a video purportedly showing the helicopter engulfed in flames, suggesting the incident was a targeted operation. You guys know I always keep you up to date on the great Mi-24 massacre. Recent intelligence reports from South Korea's National Intelligence Service and the U.S. State Department confirm that over 10,000 North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia. Initially trained in eastern Russia, these forces have now moved to western Kursk Oblast and are actively participating in combat operations alongside Russian units. The development follows the ratification of a mutual defense treaty between North Korea and Russia, obligating both nations to provide military assistance if either is attacked. The treaty was signed in June 2024 and was ratified in November and signifies a deepening military alliance between Russia and North Korea. Also, for the first time, a North Korean M1989 Koksan self-propelled artillery system has been observed in Russia. The system was identified during transportation via rail in Krasnoyarsk based on geolocation from Twitter account Status 6. Russian propagandist media circulated a photograph showcasing the equipment, which matches the distinctive profile and 5-roller track chassis of the Koksan howitzer. The Koksan is a long-range artillery system with a 170mm caliber, allowing for exceptional firing distances. Conventional shells are reported to reach up to 40 kilometers, while active-reactive ammunition extends ranges to approximately 60 kilometers. However, its firing rate is considered low, with a capacity of 1 or 2 shots every 5 minutes. The system outperforms all Russian cannon artillery in range except for the Soviet 203mm 2C7 Pion when using active-reactive shells. It weighs 40 tons and was initially revealed in a 1989 parade in North Korea's Koksan City. It's an advancement from the M1978 system from the 1970s, originally developed for deep artillery strikes on South Korea. And the system has a long combat history, having been deployed by Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. In January 1987, it was used for large-scale artillery operations, including rocket-assisted projectiles during the Kerbala 5 operation near Basra. The Koksan is considered a potential threat due to its range capabilities and potential counter-battery for systems such as the Panzer Howitzer, Caesar, and Bodana. Its appearance in Russian service also provides access to North Korea's extensive stockpile of unused 170mm ammunition. Roman Starovoyt, the former governor of Russia's Kursk region and current transport minister, has publicly confirmed that Russian soldiers looted homes in the Glushkovsky district after residents fled due to Ukraine's border incursion. Speaking at a meeting with locals on Thursday, Starovoyt acknowledged instances of theft involving both military personnel and civilians. His remarks were met with applause from the audience and followed discussions with law enforcement agencies addressing the crimes. He emphasized that measures are being taken to improve security in the area, revealing that stolen items were being transported deeper into Russia using delivery services. Meanwhile, Alexei Smirnov, the current governor, discussed the meeting on his Telegram channel but omitted any mention of the looting. Previously, on November 11th, Russian state media accused Ukrainian soldiers of looting homes in the village of Glushkova. However, the claim was swiftly debunked by military bloggers who noted that the village had never been under Ukrainian control. Following this, TASS amended their report, changing the location to a village in the Glushkovsky region and avoiding specific references to Glushkova. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has officially approved the deployment of domestically developed Pernak remote-controlled weapon modules within its defense forces. The module is equipped with a 7.62mm machine gun and includes a control system unit featuring a battery and camera mounted on a turret. The Pernak module enhances the operational capabilities of Ukrainian forces by allowing remote engagements of targets, thereby reducing direct exposure to combat situations. In addition to the Pernak, Ukraine has been integrating other remote-controlled weapon systems, such as the Shabliak combat module, which has been authorized for use by the Army. So up next we have economy and aid. The European Commission has committed to providing Ukraine 4.1 billion euros through the Ukraine Facility Program, as confirmed by the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on November 14th. The allocation is intended to help sustain Ukraine's government operations during the war with Russia. However, the transfer does require approval from the EU Council. The Ukraine Facility Program, launched earlier this year, outlines a framework for recovery, reconstruction, and modernization tasks to be undertaken by Ukraine. The European Commission mentioned recent Ukrainian reforms as a key factor in releasing the latest tranche of funds. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal expressed optimism that the EU Council would approve the decision promptly. He noted that once approved, total EU support under this program for the year would reach 16.1 billion euros. The United States is preparing to deliver $7.1 billion in military assistance to Ukraine from the Pentagon stockpile before the conclusion of President Joe Biden's term. The commitment was reaffirmed by Deputy Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh and was reported by the Pentagon's website. Singh emphasized the administration's dedication to utilizing the Presidential Drawdown Authority, or PDA, resources to transfer to Ukraine. She noted that the large aid packages are being developed and sent almost weekly, aligning with President Biden's directive to fully use the authority granted by Congress before his term ends. Singh also mentioned that to ensure both U.S. military readiness and that Ukraine's battlefield needs are being met, the Pentagon is actively replenishing its inventory while simultaneously supplying Ukraine with critical resources. Israel has provided Ukraine with the necessary technology and equipment to implement an advanced early warning system, with the project now reportedly nearing completion. Ukraine's ambassador to Israel, Yevhen Kornichuk, revealed this during the 5th Kyiv Jewish Forum. He noted that parts of the system, including three-dimensional radars manufactured in Israel, are already in use by the Ukrainian military. He emphasized the interconnected nature of challenges faced by Ukraine and Israel, pointing to shared adversaries such as Iran and its proxies, which are supported by Russia. He also discussed the regional and global implications of these alliances, mentioning that Russian-made weapons, many produced recently, have been utilized in wars in Lebanon. He speculated that the possibility of North Korean missiles appearing in the region, framing this as part of a broader axis of evil. In June 2023, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen disclosed that Ukrainian and Israeli military teams were collaborating to establish an air raid warning system for Ukraine, with initial operations taking place in Poland. The European Union, for the first time, has approved funding for joint defense procurement by its member states, marking a significant step in coordinated military collaboration. This funding under the European Defense Industry Reinforcement through Common Procurement Act, or EDIRPA, includes plans to acquire missiles and ammunition, with a portion allocated for Ukraine's defense needs. The initiative is part of 5 projects, each receiving around 60 million euros in EU funding. The projects cover procurement of the Mistral and Iris-T SLM air defense systems, 155mm ammunition, and armored personnel carriers. Collectively, the total value of these projects exceeds 11 billion euros and involves 20 EU member states. According to the European Commission, many of these projects aim to bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities against Russian aggression by supplying air and missile defense systems and ammunition. EDIRPA, established after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, serves as a short-term measure, it ends in 2025, to enhance joint defense procurement among EU nations and Norway. To continue this effort beyond 2025, the European Commission proposed the European Defense Industry Programme, or EDIP, in March, intending to replace EDIRPA as a long-term framework for collaborative defense initiatives. The Ukrainian 155th Mechanized Brigade, named after Anna of Kyiv, has successfully completed an intensive training program in France. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov confirmed that the brigade not only received high-quality general and specialized training, but was also fully equipped with modern French military hardware and systems. This training and equipment support were provided under the EU's military training mission for Ukraine. The brigade's training includes the use of VAB armored personnel carriers, AMX-10RC armored fighting vehicles, Caesar self-propelled howitzers, Mistral portable air defense systems, and Milan anti-tank guided missiles. French President Emmanuel Macron, who had earlier announced in October that 2,300 Ukrainian soldiers would be trained in France, along with the equipment they would use in combat. This initiative marks the first instance of an entire Ukrainian brigade being trained and equipped by France. In late October, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced further cooperation with France, which includes equipping another brigade as part of military aid. Zelensky also extended an invitation to other nations to join Ukraine in forming additional brigades, emphasizing a commitment to broader European defense. At least 3 Russian oil refineries may shut down next year as they struggle with a combination of declining exports, rising crude oil costs, and soaring interest rates, according to a Reuters report citing anonymous sources. The Tuapse refinery, a major facility owned by state-backed Rosneft, and 2 smaller independent refineries, Ilsky in Krasnodar and Novoshakhtinsky in Rostov, have faced significant financial challenges, including weak profit margins and reduced production levels. The Tuapse refinery, described as a relatively unsophisticated one, has reportedly halted operations multiple times this year. Meanwhile, the Ilsky and Novoshakhtinsky refineries have been operating at about half capacity for months. These facilities have also been targeted by repeated Ukrainian drone strikes, which further disrupt their operations. Compounding these issues, Western sanctions have forced Russian oil producers to sell fuel at discounted prices, adding to further financial pressures. Independent refiners are particularly vulnerable in Russia, lacking the support of large parent companies and facing steep borrowing costs amid Russia's high interest rates. Last month, the Russian central bank raised its key rate to a record 21% and is expected to increase it further in December. This has placed significant strain on smaller operators who are already grappling with the ruble's weakening and the surge in crude oil prices, which have reached 50,000 rubles per ton in October, which is around $499, which is far above the 35,000 rubles or $349 per ton needed for the companies to break even. These struggling refineries have reportedly sought government support to stay operational. However, industry insiders anticipate closures could occur as early as 2025. Major oil companies and the refineries mentioned in the report declined to comment. Russia's large and medium-sized refineries process about 5.5 million barrels of crude oil daily, with 2 million barrels allocated for export and the remainder consumed domestically. Smaller plants, which were not included in the report, are also expected to face challenges in the current economic climate. Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer has assured citizens that the country is well prepared to handle the cessation of natural gas supplies from Russia's Gazprom during the heating season. The announcement followed a notification from Gazprom to the Austrian energy company OMV regarding the suspension of gas deliveries. Nehammer emphasized that Austria had anticipated such a scenario since the onset of the war and highlighted that the country had taken significant steps to reduce their dependence on Russian energy. He assured the public that Austria's gas storage facilities are currently 93% full, sufficient to meet the country's annual demand, and that alternative sources of supply have been secured. The chancellor made it clear that Austria would not bow to what he described as blackmail by President Putin and had already informed the European Commission about the situation. The decision by Gazprom to halt supplies came after OMV refused to reimburse an arbitration fee of 230 million euros. OMV had earlier predicted this development and diversified its gas imports, incorporating non-Russian suppliers and expanding capacity to mitigate the impact. Nehammer pledged that Austrian households would remain warm through the winter and that no apartment would go without heating. Slovak state-owned energy supplier Slovenský plynárenský priemysel has initiated a short-term pilot agreement to purchase natural gas from Azerbaijan. So remember, I think last week I told you guys that Slovakia was saying there's no deal on the table. It seems that, again, I try to keep you guys updated whenever the position on this reverses. So it seems like within the scope of a week, we've reversed again. SPP CEO emphasized the importance of ensuring secure gas supplies for all customers, including industrial and residential users. To this end, the company has diversified its supply contracts, partnering with major energy firms such as BP, ExxonMobil, Shell, Eni, and RWE. These efforts have allowed SPP to maintain a safety cushion of around 150% of its customers' consumption needs, with plans to expand their reserve further. If Russian gas supplies through Ukraine are halted, the Turk Stream pipeline across the Black Sea may become a critical route for transporting gas from Russia or Azerbaijan to Slovakia. However, SPP estimates that replacing Russian supplies entirely would cost an additional 140 million euros annually, which would pose financial and logistical challenges. Slovakia, alongside Austria and Hungary, remain the most dependent on Russian energy imports in the European Union. Moscow significantly reduced pipeline gas flows to Europe in 2022, prompting many European countries to seek alternative suppliers. Negotiations between Azerbaijan, the EU, Moscow, and Kyiv are ongoing to secure Azeri gas transit after Ukrainian pipelines stop handling Russian supplies. However, critics argue that increased Azerbaijani imports may not reduce Europe's dependence on Russian gas, as Azerbaijan itself has boosted its own purchases from Russia since the beginning of the war. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war in Ukraine and withdraw Russian troops during a one-hour phone call on Friday, marking their first direct conversation in nearly 2 years. A German government spokesperson confirmed that Scholz called on Putin to negotiate with Ukraine to achieve a, quote, just and lasting peace. The chancellor had informed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of the call in advance. Scholz has been advocating for a second peace conference on Ukraine that would include Russia, following an initial summit held in Switzerland in June, which excluded Kremlin participation. During the conversation, Scholz and Putin agreed to remain in contact. The German chancellor also raised concerns over reports of North Korean soldiers being deployed to Russia for combat against Ukraine. The dialogue follows the last exchange between the two leaders in December 2022, which occurred a few months after Russia launched the full-scale invasion. Niger's government is seeking investment from Russian companies in its uranium and broader natural resource sectors as relations with France continue to deteriorate. This shift comes in the wake of France's nuclear company Orano halting uranium production in Niger after the military junta, which assumed power in July 2023, revoked its permit for one of the world's largest uranium deposits. Niger's mining minister, Osume Abarchi, confirmed discussions with Russian firms interested in exploring and exploiting the country's resources, extending beyond uranium. Speaking to state-run Russian news agency RIA Novosti, Abarchi questioned the feasibility of allowing French companies to continue resource extraction, given France's refusal to recognize Niger's government. He cited statements from French leadership rejecting the legitimacy of the junta as grounds for re-evaluating French operations in Niger. The pivot away from France is part of a broader trend among West African nations rethinking their historical ties with their former colonial power. Many of these countries are now turning to Russia and other nations for strategic and economic partnerships. Niger's new leadership has also pledged to overhaul mining regulations for foreign companies, aiming to assert greater control over resource extraction. As the world's seventh largest uranium producer, its decision to seek alternative partners could have significant implications for global energy and mining markets. The foreign ministers of Ukraine and Japan, Andriy Sybiha and Takeshi Iwaya, have agreed to strengthen sanctions on Russia and pursue further steps towards easing visa requirements. The discussions took place during Iwaya's unannounced visit to Kyiv on November 16th, marking one of his first international trips since the formation of Japan's new government. Sybiha emphasized the importance of Japan's role in implementing Ukraine's victory plan and peace formula, and expressed gratitude for Japan's ongoing support. He noted that Japan has already imposed 26 rounds of sanctions targeting individuals and entities in Russia and Belarus since the invasion began, and he said both nations are committed to preventing efforts to bypass the measures. On visa liberalization, the ministers agreed to continue discussions aimed at fostering closer ties between their citizens. The Japanese foreign minister announced plans to host an international conference on demining in Ukraine next fall, and Japan aims to mobilize both public and private sectors to support these initiatives and will welcome Ukraine's first vice prime minister and minister of economy, Yulia Sverdenko, to Japan in December to further bilateral cooperation. Japan also included a tribute by Iwaya to the victims of the Russian occupation in Bucha. And my last news item for this week, in Abkhazia, a region that declared independence from Georgia and is supported by Russia, significant political unrest has emerged due to a proposed investment agreement with Moscow. Opposition leader Levan Mika has accused President Aslan Bjania of fleeing to a Russian military base amid escalating protests. Mika has stated that if Bjania does not re-establish contact by Monday, he will initiate impeachment proceedings through the Abkhazian parliament. In response, representatives for Bjania assert that he is simply visiting his hometown of Timishi and dismiss claims of his departure to a military base. The contentious investment agreement has sparked widespread public dissent, with critics arguing that it disproportionately benefits Russian business interests at the expense of Abkhazia's autonomy. Despite the opposition to the agreement, protest leaders emphasize that their actions are not intended to undermine Abkhazia's relationship with Russia, but to address concerns over national sovereignty and economic independence. And it's a further indication that Russia's efforts to maintain complete military control and obedience over the administration of Abkhazia is starting to slip a bit, probably due to Russia's increased attention in Ukraine and elsewhere. So that wraps up the major news items concerning the Russian invasion of Ukraine for November 17th, 2024. And now we will move to the next segment.
Yeah, that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present the most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. On Monday, Rheinmetall announced that they have been contracted by the German government to supply Ukraine with advanced reconnaissance capabilities in form of satellite imagery. Thanks to a cooperation with ICI, Rheinmetall is able to provide Ukraine with satellite images from ICI's SAR satellites, which offer the great advantage that they can generate high-resolution images regardless of weather conditions or time of day. In their press release, they also mentioned an interesting detail, namely that deliveries are already ongoing since the last month. On the same day, the German publication Loyal stated that Germany will contribute 10 million euros to the joint fund of the Capability Coalition drones, which is led by Latvia and the UK. This was confirmed by a spokesperson by the German Ministry of Defense. From the joint fund, the UK has placed a tender for FPV drones and interceptor drones. I reported on Tuesday that the German city of Leipzig is currently carrying out a delivery of a crane truck worth 63,000 euros to its Ukrainian twin city, Kyiv. The truck is perfectly suitable for rescue work and cleaning debris, which was specifically requested by the Ukrainian capital. Last but not least, the German embassy, if the slide would load, that would be perfect. No, thank you. Last but not least, the German embassy in Ukraine has made public on Thursday that Germany recently handed over 2 special trucks to demining units or teams of the National Police of Ukraine to support the demining efforts. And since we haven't had a video of the week for a few weeks now, and Joseph was always complaining, and considering the massive attacks with drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles by Russia last night, I decided to show a part of my Gepard/Cheetah archive this week. Since 2022, the German-delivered Gepard Spark has become an integral part of the Ukrainian air defense, which is particularly efficient when engaging loitering munition. So far, Germany has delivered a total of 52 Gepard Sparks and 3 Cheetah Sparks, with 12 more to come until the end of next year. In addition to the delivery of vehicles, Rheinmetall also established a new production line for ammunition financed by the German government, which ensures a steady supply until around 2026. And yeah, that's it for my segment. Back to you, Joseph.
Okay, so I think we are now going to turn it over to Erlend, who I think is very excited to introduce our guest. Mr. Erlend, over to you.
Well, guest hasn't showed up yet, so Daniele is going to do a stopgap until Mirko is with us. So thank you, Daniele.
Who are all these people, Erlend?
Yeah, so by the way, we filled the panel with people from the basement, and I guess I'll take some time to introduce them later. But
Thank you
Daniele
for
wanted
letting
to
me out of the
say
basement,
something.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Andrew is happy with letting them out from the basement, to be honest, but we'll see.
They're still chained.
The chains are not loosened. Okay. Well, Daniele, how are you? I've heard that there's some good news that you've been brewing on. Well, Daniele is muted.
Or maybe he doesn't have good news for you.
I hope he does.
Good evening.
There.
Sorry, I had to prepare a very long coffee for tonight, so I probably missed a bit.
I just said that you said you have some good news for us that you've been brewing on for a while.
Oh yes, so these news essentially are already documented widely in one of my posts, but also by different announcements from UK government, BAE, and also Rheinmetall, because there is also something that boiled under the curtain during these last few weeks and months. So I wrote a thread on these, and just to try to condensate all the different communication that came out from mainly MOD and the UK government. So the first news that we can trace back was around the 10th of April. There was a communication regarding the need to restart the production of barrel for howitzer light gun L118, 119, and AS990, because one of the issues is that these artillery pieces were donated in mass, also spare part, but essentially it came out pretty much immediately obvious that without the restart of and the production of barrels and other spare parts, these items would become unusable, not in short time, but at some point. And because this is something that UK feel very bad, not only for Ukraine, but also for itself, there was this decision to restart the production of large caliber barrels. And on this, MOD has been pretty much vague, because there were a series of not press release but announcement published on their website, where they speak at the beginning, as I said, specifically on AS90L118. Then they speak about gun barrel, and then again large caliber, and then artillery. So these two essentially say that there was kind of work behind. And if you scroll down the thread, what happened is that after a while, in this summer, late this summer, was announced that the MOD has selected the Sheffield Forge Masters, which who doesn't know, is a very large forging company, which from 2021 is owned by the MOD, which produce a very large component for UK Army, from pieces for armor, but mainly for the shipbuilding industry. And they were tasked to restart the production of gun barrels. But as many knows, restarting the production of gun barrels is not something that you can do just because you can forge large chunk of material. You need the blueprints, you need the license. So it was pretty obvious that Forge Masters was going to do not a side job, but a more technical job for someone else, in particular BAE System. And in fact, in a rapid succession, essentially you have always the government and Forge Master announcing that Forge Master was mainly involved in the production of British steel for the production of gun barrels, which is a very important news, because UK steel production is at its lowest, is not in a very good shape by any mean. And the fact that Forge Master now can work on these is a very important thing for the UK economy, because these guarantee a good stream of material for anyone who want to build this type of component in UK. In particular, this is BAE System, which now recently has, recently, just yesterday or the day before, announced that they finally started to work on the forging infrastructure. So in reality, they announced only the fact that they have these new factory is located in Sheffield, in a non very well disclosed location. But they released a couple of images. One is the outside, which show you this a very large complex, and the second one is the interior. You can see if you scroll down, I think I put 3 pictures. This is about the closure. Yeah, this one. So this is what looks like true half of a radial forging machine. So these are the foundation where potentially the radial forging machine will go. And
I just
yep.
want to note that they're digging out the concrete there, and I guess the reason is that they need to place some machinery that needs a little bit bigger slab of concrete than what was there originally. Yeah.
Yes, that's essentially is a preliminary preparatory work. So what they are going to do here, they are going to dig out the soil. You can see that essentially probably is a logistic. If you there are other images, it looks like something built for something else, in my opinion. But they probably bought in order to make it very rapidly adaptable. Is a very large complex, and so they will probably place a radial forging machine there, and you can see that there are essentially 2 sides, because when you forge barrels, you need, most of the time you need 2 manipulators, one from one side and one from the others, and in the center you have these 4 hammer that at very high speed they just squish the material around a mandrel, which can be rifled or not. And so this is a very good news, because this plant, of course, is going to produce also M777 barrels, and this is also a contract that I think BAE has with different countries. So they restarted this production. And aside of these, there is also Rheinmetall that signed, and on this Gao can talk a bit, because I discovered just while I was trying to understand what Rheinmetall was doing. But Rheinmetall is supposed to open potentially in Sheffield, because they are going to use the same steel from Forge Masters, another site with at least 400 employee for the production of gun barrel. Again, potentially can be other artillery or main battle tank, but probably is other artillery from what I can read. And this is very good. First of all, for Forge Master, which will have a lot of request of material, so they will be able to work on request, and so it's a good thing economically, but also for Ukraine is amazing, because this means that we have now at least 2 sites in UK that can produce gun barrel. One, of course, for systems that are a bit older, like ACE-90 and light guns, and another one that probably will work on more new system. So it's all good, especially when you think that it required a war to have at least 2 radial forging machine in Britain after Cold War. I mean, honestly, I still can't believe that this is happening, and it's also happening at very good speed. Of course, this type of factory are less complex than, for example, an artillery munition production site. So this is the good news, essentially, for now. If there is any question, very happy to reply.
Well, I guess first question I have is how long do you think it takes until they can actually output something?
Oh, I can tell you that is very, very quick, because if you look, even BAE has been very optimistic, because they say within 2025 it will start to produce barrels. So is at this point the biggest issues is make sure that the machine produced is going to be qualified. So they need to do a series of tests which take times. You need to ensure that the concrete and all the foundation are good enough. Now, it's not as a very large press where you may have big issues. The radial forging machine are not that heavy, it's not that critical, but they will probably need some time, physical time, to do everything properly. But they can do within 2025. It's a completely reasonable timing. And the other big point is that this gives time to Forge Master to adapt, because Forge Master is also building a completely new site for heat treatment and other things which will be important for this production line. But in general, everything looks like a very well streamed. So it's very should be in time. For Rheinmetall will take a bit longer. They say 2027. Hello, Mirko.
Hi, everybody.
So 2027 for the Rheinmetall plant, and 2025 for BAE. But BAE started earlier, so this is also why it's going to take less.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I should introduce our guest, and I'm not sure if the green screen works for you, but I think Restream has the possibility. I miss your classical map background, Mirko. Anyways, benvenuto, buonasera, welcome, Mirko. I'm very, very happy to have you on our stream for the first time.
Glad to be here and trying with this background, but
usually Mirko has a very recognizable map of Ukraine in the background. Anyways, I'll just for our viewers that might not know Italian OSINT community so well, and Mirko. I want to introduce him. He's Mirko Campochiari is also known as Parabellum. That's the name of his channel. He is an esteemed, I would say, very well esteemed military historian and analyst in the Italian info space. You're streaming more or less every week or almost every day, I would say. Something is coming out from your channel very often, and in the past you've been focusing a lot on history, and you still are uploading history videos, as I see. And since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, you've been very active in the Italian info space, also joining in other streamers, big notable streamers in Italy. And I would say that you've been fundamental in debunking a lot of the propaganda that has been, unfortunately, has infested the Italian media space. We can talk about that later as well if you want to. But it has been, in my opinion, crucial for people who want to find information that is relevant and true and facts based on real things, rather than narratives spun by one or the other direction, that you have been present in the Italian info space. So thank you very much. And I just want to say also that since it's you're a guest, that I want to plug your new book. Is this the new? Yeah, this is the newest book.
Yeah.
Most recent book. Storia militare della guerra russo-Ucraina, volume 1. I think that means there's a follow-up coming. So it's the history of military history of the Russian-Ukrainian war, 1917 to 2014. So
The most easy one.
This is the easy part, you would say?
Yeah, the historical part is the most easy one. What happens in the middle between this war and the Donbass is much harder. Girkin and all that kind of stuff. Also because it's not like doing historical stuff, in the sense you can't simply read books or find sources in normal archives. Everything is online. So you need to extrapolate, you need to save, because a lot of the stuff that is online is going to be lost in the next 5 years. Already now it's very hard to find videos of the first 6 months of the war. You are going to lose them unless you are saving them. So it will be a very different way to make books. My idea is to make a QR code when there is the sources, so you can go to my website, and when we refer to transcription of dialogue between Girkin and maybe a Russian oligarch, you will go there to the site and you will find the video.
Yeah, we're facing some of the same challenges, and we're trying to do what we can with almost no funds to save a lot of material. And then we also
people think it's cheap. No, it's not. We have a server, thanks to a friend, which also does film streaming and things like that, which have 400 terabytes. Plus we have the OSINT map. All this stuff between that server and the OSINT map, collaborators, cost for hosting, etc. It's around €1,000 a month.
Yep. You also had another book, which is also quite recent. The word, okay, I'll do it in Italian first, and then I'll try to translate it. La parola della guerra, viaggio nel mondo dei termini militari. So the word of the war, a travel in the world of military terminology, and that is quite an adventure to jump into. Is it only Italian?
Yeah, it's all Italian, but we are working on translation. I think this is a book that was spawned, from the needs of the community. In the sense, we take for granted that everybody knows what is a brigade, what is an officer, or what is a line of contact. What is a fixation of the enemy. And so we made this book mainly to introduce the people to the right terminology when we are talking about, because in the Italian journalism sphere, you read like, I don't know, Azov battalion attack on Toretsk, new offensive. Hardly a battalion can make an offensive. So we need to agree on certain terminology to understand what's going on. So it was needed. And in Italy, in the last 20, 30 years, pretty much we avoided talking about military stuff, military culture. So people are not accustomed as I'm 42. In my teenage period, there was a lot of military stuff, even on the press, on the paper. You could buy everything, in the last 20 years, not much. So for a younger audience, is a big problem following even the most simple military terminology. For example, tactical maneuvers. The difference between tactics and strategy is a problem.
Yep. No, that's absolutely something needed in English as well. I guess in Italian, I actually probably should acquire this book, because I have immense problems translating military linguistics to Italian, because I never really did any writing or reading of.
Well, we have the same problems in the sense the majority of the acronyms and terminology is English. When we do videos about technical stuff like drones or aeronautics, we tend to say, oh, notching, cranking. Try to translate notching and cranking in Italian. You're going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. So already some of the people in chat are saying, what's the link of his channel? I posted the link of your channel in the description. So, or you can just press that link and you should arrive to the channel.
I think the most interesting part for them is the geolocalized map of the conflict. We tend to place, location or units only when we have a confinement geolocation, which is very important. So it provides to the people an unbiased vision, in the sense we don't place in advance unless we have a confirmation.
Is that
Ukrainian
in your Is that on your Twitter?
Yeah, it's in the description of. It's on Twitter also. On my Twitter, is linked or on the blog. That's a work of many people, in the sense there is people administrating the server, people updating, and people doing geolocalizations, but also like we have talked in the other live, we have people to single sectors. They follow a single sector because they get so accustomed to the morphology of the terrain, of the units, that sometimes just by a road, by a tree line, they can identify pretty much a fight location. So you have pretty much specialized people for Toretsk, specialized people for Pokrovsk, and things like that, which is a strange new job.
Yeah, so this is kind of a good bridge to the fact that we have Andrew Perpetua here and a couple of people from his basement. The basement is basically the slaves that are slaving around, doing exactly the same things that your guys are doing. So Andrew, people may know, I hope by now, we had Road to Mars on the stream before. You asked a couple of questions when we had another guest on, and he's one of the people that is doing geolocations and video analysis. And Geschlittert, or Gesh, is
hello.
Welcome, by the way, to both of you.
Welcome.
And to Andrew. Gesh is tracking Russian military units, and especially those that the Russians that fall asleep very much. And
let's say like that, they're likely falling asleep.
They like to fall asleep a lot, don't they? So because of YouTube, we're doing some strange things with AI. We tend to say fall asleep, and I think that's a good tactic of mentioning certain things. So, I mean, Andrew, Mirko just touched into some things that you're very, very accustomed to as well, and you guys should probably talk more. So this is a good introduction, I think, because you're doing a lot of the similar things that Andrew is doing, and it's very good that more independent people are doing it, and it's just not, and also especially that it's happening also in other countries. So Andrew, the stuff Mirko mentioned about people recognizing tree lines or special cities or towns and specializing in it, that's something we know about, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we in our project, I know I specialized in a few areas of geolocating, and all the areas I specialized, Russia has now captured. It's really depressing. But yeah, it's really useful. Like when you look at the same units over and over again, it becomes very obvious where things are. It's very easy. And especially if you limit yourself to a small number of, like for example, in Rabatana, we had all gotten so accustomed to Rabatana that we knew every tree stump, we knew like every bump in the road, we knew every single thing you could possibly know about that town and its entire surroundings. And then since then, the battle has moved on, and we've all completely forgotten everything. And now if you show us a map of Rabatana, we have no clue what's going on. But it doesn't matter anymore anyway. So
yeah, in that I'm more lucky because I have a particular kind of memory. I have an eidetic kind of memory. So whenever I see something, it remains on my mind. So if you ask me, you can try this game. If you ask me wherever it is in unit, I remember exactly where it is because we moved that, I saw that. And when I have a picture, I know. The funny part is that I know the geography of Ukraine better than Italy now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I don't know anything about Western Ukraine. Like I can name like 5 cities in Western Ukraine, and but Eastern Ukraine.
Me too. I remember a couple of cities because the Russians were going towards a nuclear plant. But if you ask me around the border with Hungary and the others, not so much. But if it's something that is on the line of contact or it was bombed, then yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean the tracking of units is something I never got into. I know like Gesh, I leave that to other people. I don't really care so much about tracking units. It's like a thing that my memory just doesn't work that way. Like I don't think that way. I don't think in terms of units, so it's very difficult. It's very alien to me. So I think more in terms of space and in shapes. So like the where things are matter more to me than who is there. So yeah. And yeah, and doing this stuff is way more expensive than people think it is, especially mapping stuff. Maps are expensive, man. Like unless you're like doing it entirely yourself, I guess. But if you're like getting software, it's so expensive, and the software isn't.
Yeah, people don't realize we need to pay the software, we need to pay for the host, we need to pay for the people that is following the units. Then you need to tweak a lot by yourself because it's not exactly what you want, and it's labor intensive in the sense every day, multiple times a day, we need to confront like 20 other maps, hundreds of OSINTs and Telegram because maybe this guy have a video, then you need to geolocalize the video, then you need to understand which unit is related to that video, who is hitting who, to give you an idea so you can locate. For us, it's very useful because we understand, for example, rotation. If we geolocalize the same unit fighting over and over in the same place, like the 79 Airborne, we know that these poor guys are fighting in the same place since eight months without rotation. We spot, for example, a lot of rotation regards the Russian units because every 2-3 weeks, a good 50% of them change, some don't. We can see, for example, the change of system. They moved, they shifted, from the tactical battle group system to the old regimental and divisional stuff because that system was not good for an attritional warfare. And we see bigger units because they can absorb much more losses. Pretty much almost every unit used by Russia now is back to the regimental stuff. And even the Donetsk and Lugansk People Republic, even if we are still holding some icons, as Donetsk, technically they are all absorbed into the Russian Federation army. We just keep them because we are tracking them, but slowly we are going to convert them into Russian units because they change also identification names and things like that, and also the internal organic system. Some of them were battalions, now they are regiments because they incorporate multiple units. So we understand more how they are evolving through the war. For example, recently, the Ukrainian units which lack tanks, they were tank brigades. They incorporate them with other units, and they have become heavy mechanized brigades. Much bigger than the usual Ukrainian brigades of 3,500, 4,500 people. So it is the same process, but with a different approach.
Yeah, Gesh, did you want to say something about the Russian units?
I just found the map very interesting. I'm just looking at the individual ones. I mean, I had something prepared for Kursk, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that.
We can move to the topic that we that we planned for, of course. So we wanted to talk a little about Kursk, and the reason why I got the idea is because you commented in Andrew's last stream. What about Kursk and what's happening? What do you think? And I guess we should probably start in a kind of a different. Not necessarily the current standing, but with the whole operation itself and what it kind of has led to for Ukraine, for Russia, and if it's been a success. I shared some topics with you, but we can talk about anything you want. I don't want to go through all those points necessarily, but wanted to kind of go through a couple of things. And for instance, justifications for the Kursk operation in a strategic manner. What do you think Ukraine achieved in this sense, and do you think it's paid off?
Political wise, probably yes, considering in these hours we are talking about a possible Biden declaration for removing the red line of using weapons, long range weapons into Russia. So there is a lot of, I think we need to divide this stuff into political gain, strategic gain, tactical gain. Political wise, it showed that the so blatant red lines of Russia are made on the sand, and that's a bluff, which was one of the weapons that Russia used to scare pretty much the support of the single nations of Europe. Everybody's afraid that if we give them the ability to hit this or there with a Western weapon, then Russians are going to escalate. Strategic wise, it showed that the Ukrainians are still able to conduct massive operations on their own terms, under secrecy, which is the most important after the fail of the summer offensive of the last year, and that they're still able, to achieve surprise. One of the objectives was probably to shift some of the reserve of Russia towards this zone, removing potential from Donbass offensive, and this not really happened. Tactical wise, it's debatable in the sense that they needed to take Korenovo and they failed. Korenovo was essential to hold at least the Kursk salient, and maybe even take the other city in their note if you want to expand that control and cause even more unrest. One interesting factor was the turmoil in the military bloggers of Russia. They consider this humiliating. These months that they are barking about removing the Ukrainians at all cost from the situation, and with a lot of accusations. And there was a lot of zrada, how they call it, panic and complaints, even, finger pointing at Putin, Shoigu, Gerasimov, etc., about how they handled this situation and why the Ukrainians still here, So there is a lot of implication in tactical level and also political inside Ukraine. Many were voicing about the fact that Syrskyi was at risk on his position, exactly like Zaluzhny, because there is a couple of parliamentarians and senators in Ukraine which usually attack military figures, then they get removed, and they were on a strike on Syrskyi before this operation. Then they turned silent when this happened, and now they are coming back to hit at Syrskyi. Probably there is a problem also related to the fact that this is a Syrskyi/Zelensky operation, and I don't know if Syrskyi can pull back from this situation without losing the face or his job. And then there is, of course, the implications with the Western and the Americans regards the fact that as long as the Ukrainians have a piece of Kursk, I have seen this in Italy talking, now suddenly all the we call them in Italy fake peace guys, in the sense that as long as it was only Ukraine that needed to lose territory, it was fine to say, okay, let's sort a deal. Now that the Ukrainians have a piece of Russia, suddenly that discussion left the room. So I said it's not important, Zuzia or some small village that there is around. What is important is that it's a piece of Russia, and that's the main point for the Ukrainians to hold this stuff until probably Trump's get into the house. The value itself of the ground is not that much, to be honest. And then there is the internal debate between the brigade commanders in Ukraine, which are not happy about the Kursk operation because maybe they don't understand the strategic position, which was probably the one that the Ukrainians know they could not hold the Russian advance in the other regions, so they needed to do something else with these forces anyway. But I understand the commander holding his 10 kilometers, of ground, only think about, his needs and his situation, and not on the overall picture. This is the role for the high command. So people tend in the information sphere to just check, if the Russians are advancing 1 kilometer into this unknown village, or the Ukrainians not looking at the overall pictures. So I understand why this operation bring a lot of problems, a lot of thinking, a lot of bad mouth, even inside Ukraine. The problem is whenever Trump arrives, we will see if this gamble was worth, especially because considering the time, but you have the numbers because you follow the situation, the number of losses is rising on both sides. It's true that the Russians are failing often to make successful operations and that they are taking huge losses. Nevertheless, they reduced the salient by half, pretty much, since the last 2 months. The problem for the Ukrainians is, even if they are not having much losses, the losses they are having in this zone is usually irreplaceable. Challengers, Leopards, and other stuff that they're not going to receive. So calculating the losses one-on-one in that sense, I think is not fair.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of a wider range of different topics. I think we can dive into some of them further. I think that unfortunately, when people have been analyzing the Kursk operation, they tend to focus solely either on the tactical part and comparing it one-on-one towards a special part of the front in Donbass, or they've been looking only at this kind of a larger strategic
Square kilometers cooperation, pretty much.
yeah, or the large strategic impact, like for instance, the gamble that Ukraine would be able to maybe reach, and threaten the nuclear power plant or something like this, and that was a failure because they think in the operational goals in terms of only one or two, but in my opinion, we need to think in a wider range of operational goals, and you mentioned a lot of them, and some of them have been a success and some have been a failure. I don't know if Andrew and Gesh and Daniele wants to join in and give their thoughts as well.
I actually have a thought on this. I think the Russian strategic response in terms of moving units to this front from other front sectors was actually very good. They didn't really destabilize any of the front sections, and they also didn't really panic about this. Like right now, you see new units appearing constantly in other front sectors, not only Kursk. So they don't like destabilize, as I said, the other sectors only for this. And yeah, this is sadly not something good for us, because this means the Russian high command isn't completely incompetent, obviously. But I think on an operational level, the way they're currently conducting this operation, it's kind of catastrophic for them. The losses, for example, the 810th Brigade had are insane. I've never seen something like this before. I've seen so many missing people per day that not even in Pokrovska had numbers like that. For example, the 15th Brigade is very kind of infamous for missing a lot of men on a very constantly, because they have also a very special reinforcement system where they get constantly reinforced from reserve regiments, and not even they had losses such as this. This is I don't know. It's incredible.
Yeah, I saw entire column of MRAP and other stuff abandoned. So that's the problem of these homogeneous kind of forces that Ukraine are using here. If you analyze the first 3 weeks of the operation, where majority were elite forces with a lot of experience, it was very different. Considering this was an offensive operation and the fact that they achieved pretty much even positive kill ratio in terms of vehicles, etc. When you introduce, territorial defense units, then suddenly everything changes. Like, especially when there is a rotation. That's the biggest problem. Communication and rotation leave a lot of gaps in the front. That's what happened in Cherretny. That's what happened in Vuhledar. What's happening in other parts of the front. The mixture of new units / territorial units and more elite units.
And yeah, that's kind of what led to the Snagost debacle, where the Russians could take a huge swath of land back in Kursk in a very short time in the west.
That's the failure of Korenovo. If they managed to take Korenovo, and the Russians didn't have a logistic place where to launch an attack beside pretty much going to Zvanoy and through all the bridges which were destroyed. So it was much harder for the Russians to organize a response. Also, the Russians displaced their troops in a very particular way, in the sense on the left of the Senate, there is all the VDV stuff, VKS, VDV. On the others, there is a mixture of everything, normal regiments, Chechens, and other stuff. So they clearly choose a point where to locate their units and from there launch an attack. Initially, I think they were over enthusiastic and maybe They were aiming for the roads that go from Suny to Zuzha, and then they realized that that's a small counterattack from the Ukrainians on the left, pretty much menaced their maneuver. The problem is that it was only for a moment.
Yep, this attack was in theory threatening the main road in and out of Suja, but it didn't. They overextended. I'm quite confident in saying that the Russians did actually overextend here. I'm not sure how far in we had confirmation of Russian presence, but it looked kind of nasty for a few days there.
Do you see the change in tactics? Initially, the push was from two sides, on the bottom right, and from Korenovo towards south. A much bigger pincer maneuver, but then the right side completely failed to achieve any surprise or any advance, maybe a kilometer. And now they changed the tactics into creating smaller salients and eating them one by one, but much more smaller, like 2, 3, 5 kilometers front at maximum. It's the same problem they have on the south. They have big problems to make combined operations when you need to coordinate multiple brigades. So they choose pretty much to very small encirclements or menace small encirclements where you only coordinate a couple of regiments. I think the biggest operation we have seen in the last 3 months was the push that they did in front of Kurakove, which was 3 regiments for a total of 50, 60 vehicles. Much smaller than what we have seen the last October in 2023 when they tried to encircle Avdiivka, and they failed horribly.
Yeah.
And now they're using Urals as their combat vehicle. Everything's going great.
Oh, yes. And another thing I have for the, that it's an indication of the losses of the Russians in this area, is there were, especially the 22nd Regiment had the first combat deployment in Kursk. If you maybe remember the Rilsk strike, the Hamas strike in Rilsk at the beginning of the invasion, where a huge column of Russian vehicles was destroyed. That was, for example, basically the bathing of fire for the 22nd. And let's say that was not a good beginning, and it is not going well anymore as well, because they are now so depleted that the units are getting attached to the 155th and the 810th Russian Marine Brigades. And the same is the case for the 13th Regiment. I don't think they're really combat capable anymore on their own, and they're now trying to replenish the losses in the Marine Brigades with those units, like kind of make a patchwork.
Yeah, I think someone made a calculation how many men were, substituted in 155, and it's 10,000 during these almost 3 years of war. So 4 times the full complements of the unit.
It's insane. I mean, they were the guys at Vuledar, and we saw what happened there back then. And I also have something prepared for the units that were moved, because we have tracked in the team that I'm in. We have tracked all the units that have been moved to Kursk from both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and also tried to figure out where they were previously. And we can see most of the units, nearly all of them, were moved from either northern Kyiv, like from the Khilopke, or what's the town called again? Vovchansk, obviously, or from the Vovchansk area. Nearly both from the Russians and the Ukrainians. A lot of units have been moved there, and now I guess the front has kind of stabilized, and there's a small Ukrainian advantage, but they can't really develop that either. And for the rest, I would say from the Pokrovsk direction, as you know, the 47th has been moved from Pokrovsk, and for the Russians, not really anything has actually been moved from this area at all. There are some small battalions. For
example. A couple of units, the Wagner veterans PMC, which was active in Torsk, and a couple of drones unit from Robotine. That's the only unit that were moved pretty much from the south. not much else. The rest, as you say, is from Vovchansk and other deep parts of Russia. If you follow Pulevulan, he made a very good infographics about tracking the original location of every units, Russian and Ukrainian side, that are now located here. I want to ask you, this is a question that I have in my mind. When the Russian tried their attack or buffer zone on North Kharkiv, Vovchansk, I have seen the Ukrainians sending a lot of units, way more that was needed to hold the Russians. So I was wondering if they disguised this movement also for moving into Sumy, in the sense we send way more than is needed. The Russian thinks we are on panic, and instead they moved a lot of this unit later to Sumy to do that operation, because like 50% of those units that were in the Vovchansk-Khliboke front then took participation into the Kursk attack.
I mean, possible, but I don't know. It feels very speculative. I mean, seeing what the Ukrainian high command is doing elsewise, it's hard to believe that they had so much foresight this time.
Well, we know this attack on Kursk was planned many months in advance, because we were watching the planning unfold over time. We were watching them dismantle the battalions that were manning the defenses. We were watching them destroy their EW equipment and their communication network. This attack was planned at least 6 months in advance. Everybody knew who was going to be there and who was doing what, who was attacking what. This was all predetermined. So this attack was definitely 100% planned before Vovchansk was ever attacked. And this attack on Sucha had already started before Russia attacked Vovchansk. So I'm not really sure what Ukraine was doing plan-wise, but we know that this was planned very well in advance. Like, they started planning this probably in spring.
Yeah, I followed Andrew when you were noticing all the drones that were destroying all communication systems in the area. A lot of drones activity, like shaping the ground before an attack. So there was a lot of clue. But what's the funny part? The military bloggers in the Russia infosphere, they got this. There were months they were saying the Ukrainians are going to attack in the zone, and nobody listened to them.
One thing I find kind of surprising is that, for example, the Russian moved a whole VDV division from Bakhmut and a VDV brigade, so the 106th Division and the 11th Brigade. And what's surprising to me is that they are still seeing as much success there as they are now. So I don't really know what's going on there, how it's developing the way it is right now, because from the units that were moved from down there, I don't know, wouldn't have indicated that way to me, that they're still seeing, like, they're still able to advance. And I mean, they had maybe a huge advance like yesterday or 2 days ago, where we first spotted Russian units in the middle of Chasiv Yar, basically, and they're moving in Stupochki and in Klishivka. So that's actually a surprising development to me.
Well, it's probably because Ukraine has no men, to be honest.
Same thing happening in Kupiansk right now. The raid they did in Kupiansk is because there is only 2 battalions covering Kupiansk. Probably the Ukrainians didn't think the Russians would want to go in a urban area that fast, but they did. And seems that now they are fighting. They are enlarging the bridgehead that they made. There is a lot of holes. And now it's a sort of patchwork army, in the sense that you need to send a unit to cover this area, then you need to move another. And that's the biggest problem. Also, the change of tactics in the Russians. They send 2 multiple small assault teams, 3-4 people, expendable. And once they discover the Ukrainian position, they use the FABs, and then later they send into the breach more competent units. So there is a lot of expendable people in that sense, but now they're using, they're doing this in a very cynic way. Expendable people forward to find enemies, then demolish the Ukrainian position, then send the good units in, and they can keep going like this for a bit of time, considering also the money offer, it's triplicated in the last year. How much money they offer, and it starts to becoming interesting for certain people in the rural areas of Russia to try, especially considering that from their point of view, they're winning, and maybe the war will be closed in 6 months.
Yeah, I saw some calculations that for people in the Tuva area, taking up a contract could actually save them financially for the next 20 years if you compare it to the normal salary that they would have in a median salary in the area. And if you think that most of the people that sign up most likely are not even in the median kind of range of what kind of salary they could hope for having, we are looking at people getting fixed for life if they survive the war. So of course this is it's tempting for them to sign up for this, and it's even if it's a suicide, it's crazy. But considering what kind of lives they have there, maybe they feel like, yeah, maybe I'll turn out with the lottery ticket in the end, winning, and my life will be fixed. So, but at the same time, the Russians are having problems recruiting, and they don't reach their goals.
I don't think those rising prices are any positive thing for the Russians at all. I think it's actually very bad that they have to raise the prices so much to actually attract people. Like you said, it's currently could fix you for 20 years, and they still have to raise it. They're still not getting enough people with those rates.
They lack people also for the industry, because of course if you're recruiting good people for fighting, you will have problems in that sense. And another big problem is the systems that the Russians have for recruiting people, in the sense that they get financial funds, like in their small oblast, based on how many people you declare you have. So there is the tendency to declare more. So when the state arrives to you and say, hey, you have 5,000 people in this zone, you need to provide them, and then suddenly you lied that there were 5,000, you have a big problem. So they try to pretty much go ahead of their corruption, which bloated these numbers. They go even in fabrics. I have seen videos of a small mayor of a city going in a fabric, say, hey, we need 20 people from this industry to go fight. And they try to recruit in South America, in Africa, and it didn't work. The majority of the people that went from these nations vanished very, very fast. It's a similarity to the Foreign Legion. I have some friends that are fighting in the Foreign Legion, even an Italian one, maybe you know him, Yuri Brevitali. And initially the Foreign Legion International Legion in Ukraine was 20,000 people. Now they are around 3,000. That's how harsh is the environment. And considering also that who is in the International Legion in Ukraine are not receiving 20 years worth of paycheck, they get $300.
Yeah. So, Gesh, did you have any more on the prepared list?
Let me check. Those were the main points, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I think maybe we want to move to the premise for why this conversation took place in the first place. That Ukraine wanted to attack here also to prevent a further an attack against Sumy again, which would be really, really problematic for Ukraine. And Andrew, you mentioned this during your last stream. So what do you think? Do you think that was a major part of the equation when Ukraine planned this attack?
I don't know if it was part of them planning the attack, but it definitely should be part of the analysis now, because so externally, most people I've talked to think that Russia was not going to attack Sumy. And if you go around, they'll say, like, you'll see people say like Russia had no troops there. Their troops were like near Kharkiv. You know, they were attacking Kharkiv. You know, they only had a few thousand troops there to guard the border, etc. That they didn't have the resources, and that's all true. That they didn't have guys there at the moment of that Ukraine attacked. But Ukraine was 100% convinced internally that Russia was going to attack. Like, it was no question they were going to 100% attack. So this idea that you know, the troops that Ukraine attacked with into Kursk, that they could have been better deployed somewhere else, it's not true. Those troops had to be in Sumy in the north, no matter what, because Ukraine was convinced that Russia was going to attack, and they were preparing for the attack. And you know, whether the attack ever came, like, I don't know, like I can't predict the future, but they were going to have the troops there regardless, because they thought the attack was imminent. So any analysis that is hinged on Ukraine moving those troops somewhere else is baseless. It's not based on reality. It's nothing. It should be, you know, you have to look at the situation as Russia was eminently going to attack into Sumy, and that has to be the foundation of any analysis of this offensive. That those troops could not go to Pokrovsk. They weren't going to go to Toretsk. They weren't going to go to Chasiv Yar. They had to be there. So whether they had to be there in Sumy or whether they had to be there in Kursk is the question, which is the better option. And you can make arguments in either way. You could argue that Sumy had prepared positions that were better able to handle artillery shelling and airstrikes, and especially wintering. They had prepared bunkers you can stay warm and dry in, whereas in Kursk, it's kind of a, they don't have any of that basically. They're like digging stuff, but it's not there, So that's like one type of argument you could make. You could also talk about Russia they're being forced to destroy their own infrastructure, their own towns, to push Ukraine out instead of destroying the Ukrainian towns and infrastructure. You could argue that the further inland into Sumy Russia got, the further inland they would be destroying into Sumy. So that's another argument. And there's tons of arguments you could have whether attacking or defending was the better option. But an invalid argument is that those units could go somewhere else. That is wrong.
I can give you some information that give you more clue about this stuff. I remember when the commander, I think it was at the 82nd unit, refused to follow the orders, and it brings a lot of...
Yes, it was the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah.
He refused, and he ended up being dismissed, and his troops were complaining a lot, signed a letter.
And then they promoted him, but the rumors that went around, and then after we got the Kursk thing, it was related. He stated that his unit was given a task, and he considered his unit unable to follow that task, and then Kursk happened. So, and this unit at the time, if I remember correctly, was in the right of Pokrovsk. So there is units that were removed from these fronts for this task, but even 93rd, 95.
I want to say that those units were replacing other units that were moving into Toretsk.
Yes, the problem is what kind of units. For example, the Predator units,
The
which are
53rd.
made. Yeah, but also the Predator one, for example, made of ex-policemen. They're not the same quality of the 82nd. The same happened for the other fronts. All the new units, 150, they're not of the same quality. So that's the big problem. Or the new, Karadag, or this kind of units like Czerwona Haliczna, etc. They can.
So I guess the question is, do you think it would have been better for Russia to attack those weaker units with their more elite units in Sumy?
I think they have similar needs, in the sense when the Russians attacked the north of Kharkiv on both chance for this buffer zone, the Ukrainians moved there a lot of good units. And probably the Ukrainians also took into the context that they need a buffer zone for Sumy as well, and attract their good Russian units. It's like a mirroring effect in that sense. The problem is who have more capabilities to field troops. I mean, the 50,000 Russians that are around Kursk are not particularly good. The problem is the numbers. So when you have pretty much 10 of your best brigades in the north, that's a much bigger problem for the Ukrainians than the Russians. I mean, the Russians have 4 or 5 good units left. The other are below average in that sense.
I'm curious, which one would you consider good of the Russians?
There are very small units, to be honest. They're not big ones. One is doing pretty well, is the 15 of the Donetsk. They're really motivated, not because they're particularly skilled, but they are fighting since a lot of time. The 76, what's left, because they recovered some units, 98, to give you an idea, or 114. They're not, check one-on-one. They could not take the 93rd, 95, or 82 or 88 of the Ukrainians. But compared to what they have in front of them, yes.
Small correction from before, by the way. The 82nd was in northern Kharkiv, and before that it was in Zaporizhia. Just to
I also
make it clear.
said it wasn't the 82nd, it was the 80th.
80th.
It had this thing with the colonel that got dismissed and promoted because he refused to attack.
Yeah, so we have some clue about disagreement about what to do with the units from people, commanders that were already located in some fronts. For example, recently 65 was moved out of Robotyne.
Yeah, and you have those commanders saying that they don't want to go there, they think it's a waste of time. But the thing that people ignore is that the commanders in Sumy were like, we desperately need help. If you don't send help, things are going to get real bad real fast. So that's like the other side of the coin here, is that Ukraine had to support that area. And that's the real problem here, is that Ukraine has more areas that they have to support than they have people to support it with. And that's really the conversation.
Look at this from a logical standpoint. You're going to send out a unit that is familiar with his zone since a year, because it's there since a year, instead of moving a new unit. For example, why don't send a Halichna, Czerwona Haliczna or Karadag there, instead of moving units that were in a certain part of the front and they know the ground where they are? They will perform much better there. The Czerwona Haliczna will perform exactly in the same way if you send them in Pokos or Kursk, because they never were in any of these positions. While that 80 or 82 or 88 that were fighting in a certain position for a long time, they will perform better fighting in that particular ground. That's the logic fallacy, in my opinion. If you need to send some help, send new units motivated units, but not removing units that are already accustomed to their ground. And also because they have interrelationships with the other brigades that are around them.
But this isn't necessarily a problem that occurred because of the Kursk operation. This has been an issue that has been going since the failed summer offensive, or even before. Whenever there's been a big need of changes, either support or strengthening a certain part of the front lines, the Ukrainian command has been doing this whole shuffleboard of units, which has definitely been a big problem for a long time. And then I think both you, Mirko, and Andrew, we've had this conversation before where we said, like, yeah, we need regional units that basically have the command over one zone, and making sure that they keep most of the brigades in that zone for the rest of the war, really. And then maybe certain units could be specific mobile units that are supposed to move around more. Like, for instance, you see with some of the specialized drone units. I don't see any problem having certain dynamics, but there is a big problem with this, pulling out the 47th and sending them into a new zone. It's been happening so many times now.
Yeah, 47 was sent everywhere, pretty much. It seems to me like a Kampfgruppe system of World War II, when you were trying to make a unit for an emergency. Yeah, that's the biggest problem of Ukraine. Let's say you have fixed brigades for certain zone, which gives security to the other units because this is the good guys, the strong guys. The problem is you don't have any mobile reserve that are able to act. So you either extrapolate these units and create a strategic reserve to use somewhere, or you have this unit fixed to a certain position just to ensure the other lesser capable units, you strengthen them by their presence. That's the biggest problem that they have. Their army, their entire Ukrainian army is dependent on these units. When they are not present, the territorial units are not that particularly good at holding ground or coordinating with the others. You have such a pool of good units,
It's also because of the importance that it has shown to have really well prepared fortifications. It definitely changes the dynamics of how much the brigades want to invest, not just financially, but also the strain on equipment and manpower, digging trenches and fortifications. Andrew, you've been involved with fundraising for excavators, so you know how much how important this is. And
they've sent a lot of the excavators there too.
Yeah, a lot of the excavators ended up in Kursk. That's true. But so, what do you think the importance of having sort of the ownership of a region for a brigade would mean?
I mean, I think I have examples here for the Russians. I mean, you see the most successful areas for the Russians. Those units have been there for a long time. Look at Tochnyi. The 2nd Motor Rifle Division has been there since months. Look at Krasnohorivka. The 150th Motor Division or the 5th Brigade have been there since months. The most successful areas for the Russians are those areas where those units have been there for so long. They know the area. They know what they're doing. I mean, they're still interesting.
70 seconds still under Klishivka since the failure, of the Bakhmut fights. All the Donetsk People Republic and Lugansk absorbed. They are exactly fighting the same parts where they were fighting since
2022 sometimes. 14. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Luhansk people are also not that successful as we are seeing, but
Donetsk, they perform better. I call this military Darwinism in the sense if a unit is not particularly good, but you keep, refreshing the people, some of the others will survive. They know the ground. They making experience. Yeah, it's experience paid by blood and time, but they're going to improve over time, especially when you fight in the same place since 3 years or 10 years. The Ukrainians have a patchwork. They continue sending people around, and then that's a problem, in my opinion. Also, I wanted to introduce the stuff. I think you have seen OSINT sources about the Koksan, the 170 millimeters artillery from North Korea, which is traveling through Russia. Sometimes when you watch videos and you suddenly connect the dots, I was recovering a Perun video, which I think you guys know. He make analysis, especially on losses, usually quoting HIMARS or other that do OSINT, especially regards deposits and things like that. If you look the charts about what we know it's lost in terms of artillery for the Russians between the TOS-1, 122 millimeters, Uragan, 90% of the losses are on artillery or LMRS with less than 40 kilometers range. And the Koksan is not particularly new, it's not particularly good, but it was made for one thing, pretty much bombard Seoul from 40 to 60 kilometers away. And yes, the Russians have the Pion system, 203 millimeters, but not that many, while the North Koreans spent a lot of time training on this Koksan, and it was pretty much their dagger pointed at the back of the South Koreans. You can have better tanks, American support, you're not going to stop 300 of this artillery to hit Seoul if a war happens. And now they are on the move, probably towards Kursk, and this give a lot of firepower to the Russian, because with self-propelled grenades, with a rocket extra boost, they can reach 60 kilometers. Only HIMARS can hit at that range. So that's probably the help that the North Koreans can give to the Russians, more than the infantry, to be honest, which is hard to coordinate. They don't have experience, while they have a lot of experience in training with their Koksan artillery. So also because it's a strange caliber, pretty much only them, and I think Iran and Iraq have these 170 millimeters, because North Korea sold some of them in the Iran-Iraq war, and then Iraqi captured some of them. So it's completely dependent on North Korean ammunitions.
Yeah, and in general, we know that the North Koreans have been very important for the overall Russian war effort the last year. They've been supplying, according to some sources, more than half of the artillery rounds that Russia is expending. I don't know if they are precise, but it seems to be the common interpretation or acknowledgement that North Korea is basically making sure that the Russian artillery is being able to conduct fire operations right now. I don't know if this combined with the troops that are deployed in Kursk that might see combat soon have been also important for the breaking news kind of thing that is still being needs to be confirmed, of course, but that the news that is leaked out from the White House that they're lifting some restrictions. I want to be very cautious about saying what these new restrictions will be, because I don't believe the Americans will lift all restrictions. It's just based on experience with how they've been changing the restrictions that are always enforced on Ukraine from the Americans and the West. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I hope it's not some bullshit like, okay, you can use this only for firing back, because the Koksan is made for shooting once or twice and then move out. That's the point. So it will be very hard to hitting them back.
Just to add a couple of information regarding the Pion the 203 millimeter, one of the issue that Russia has is the production of the barrel. So the barrel that they had are essentially spent, and despite I traced very much most of their radial forging machine, looks like that they still have issues. And I think one of the main problem I don't think is steel, I think is manpower, I mean capabilities, people able to work on such complex project. So because there is no reason why they cannot produce them or they have so much commission on the other caliber, because another problem of another characteristic, let's say, of Russian army, which can be a problem for them, is the fact that they have so many different caliber that this puts under strain not only the logistic of actually bringing ammunition and spare parts, but also procuring them. And because when we are in a LISCO operation, a larger scale combat operation, you end up in essentially consuming an incredible amount of resources, and so having to differentiate so much puts strain on your factories. And regarding the 170 millimeter, from what I was able to gather, looks like that they are quite capable piece of artillery, but they have pretty much no motorization for the loading of the ammunition, so they can fire 1 or 2 rounds in 5 minutes, so it's very slow. So I do not expect them to fire in condition that they can be counter attacked pretty much immediately.
I read this stuff as well, but then I watched the North Korean videos, and they fire more than once or twice every 5 minutes. I think that is an underestimation. The biggest problem they have is the consumption of the barrel. When you use the rocket extra propulsion, you're going to wear down this very, very fast. But considering that was their main weapon, for menacing South Korea, I'm pretty sure they made a lot of them, a lot of reserve, also because it's very peculiar to them in that sense. If we enlarge this to what's happening to the Russian reserve, in terms of artillery, I have, cross-checked like 40 OSINT analysts, you know all of them, HIMARS, etc. And pretty much even the majority of the think tank like Season and others converge into the point where the Russians have 45 to 50% left of the artillery, and the visible one, not from satellite image. The problem is even if they consume all of these, they have enough to end of 2025, start of 2026, not considering production. Also, I noticed that people tend to watch these numbers like, oh, there is 1,000 tanks in this deposit. That means they have 1,000 tanks. No, 40-50% can be recovered pretty fast by cannibalizing the others. The remaining 20-30% is just scrap metal. So you need to consider this, and also consider the one that are on the field. They also wear down. So just looking at the numbers on paper, not to give you the real value of how much. And also, since you do a lot of this job, collecting videos as we do, and making statistics about them, 75% to 80% of the videos about Russian losses are reactivations. That's proof that pretty much only 20% of the losses are made by clearly new vehicles, T90M, T72, B3 or BMP3, to give you an idea. That means their ability to continue this war is completely related to their Soviet heritage. The main question is, will the Russian consume their Russian heritage before the Ukrainians consume their ability to hold on, because also is correlated for that consume about 2025, early 2026. The Ukrainian need to be able to impose to the Russian the same attritional warfare that they were able to impose until now. If it's going down, the time for the Russian is going to augment. And then there is, the black swan. Who knows if the Koreans or the Chinese are not going to sell them a couple of thousands of vehicles in that sense.
Yeah, I totally agree, and one of the problem, in fact, is the attrition rate is related also on the capability of fighting back, because it can be augmented by other means. For example, the intervention of drone warfare has been pretty much a life-saving thing, especially at the beginning for the Ukrainians, because they were outnumbered with less artillery shell, even mortar shell. So they had to find another way. Now the Russians are, of course, trying to do something similar, but because they are mostly on the offensive, they are more inclined to get targeted by these type of low-cost loitering munition. Yeah, that's a complete. And I think Kursk has been also a platform for studying a EW system. I don't know if we would like to speak also about that.
Well, you can see also this situation based on recovering vehicles. You do
Oh, yeah.
statistics. You can see who is advancing, etc. Because when the enemy take the ground, the amount of captured, recovered vehicles augment for the side that hold the field. And the majority of the losses of Ukrainian in Kursk were in that sense. They could not recover them because they didn't hold the field. So there is a small percentage that you need to calculate when a Russian advance in the Pokrovsk, in the sense they can recover a certain amount of vehicles or capture a certain amount of vehicles.
Yeah, if you want to go to the impact of drones and also EW in Kursk, we can talk about that a little bit. I know Daniele has more to say about that, and Andrew has a lot to say about that as well.
Yeah, I can start by doing my little starter on this topic. So I was very much interested into understanding at the beginning when the operation started. I started to look at different picture videos, especially from the Ukrainian side, and at the time I was still doing a lot of, or at least a bit of. Geolocalization, not a lot, but especially breakdown of different videos. So I was used to see vehicles on both sides, but especially Ukrainian, and I started to notice that on most, if not all, of the vehicles that were going into Kursk at the time, they were essentially adopting systematically a series of antennas that you can recognize. I created a small thread that I will try to look for it, just because I collected some of these images. But essentially, they were trying to protect most of their probably first echelon that enter into Kursk in a way to forbid the use of FPV drone, which in these cases, when you have a lot of vehicles arriving, can be a very good way for a small and outnumbered group of soldiers to trying to resist or also deter an attack, essentially. And this is something that Ukrainians are doing on a regular basis in different directions in the south. Probably more efficiently in the summer rather than now, but you couldn't see essentially a vast majority of the vehicle using low and high frequency antennas to essentially try to deter from Russian FPV drone. And also I started to navigate a little bit the Russian Telegram channel, and I encountered a group that does a lot of work, Russian group that does a lot of work on categorizing different devices from both sides, especially Ukrainian, regarding EW. And I was surprised because they were essentially telling that the Russians were very much surprised by the use of portable EW systems that were dropped by drones or even by special forces in order to create corridors to allow FPV drone to work, or allow the troops to operate in a more relatively free, FPV-free environment. I'm going to send you the image, Erlend, so you can show something. And honestly, these also led to the first appearance in Kursk of the, as a reaction to these, we noticed the start to use of the Vandal one, the Vandal drone. Correct me, Andrew, if I'm wrong, but it's the one with the fiber optic cable, which started to appear in Kursk, probably in the after Shuza was taken, and I think
Yeah,
Kursk.
the first occurrence was about mid-August, I think.
Yeah, so I think Kursk has been an example on how properly program like an operation.
Which have limited capabilities, because in a sense, as long as it have the cable, you can hit the tank if it's moving in line, but you can't really move around, for example, in an urban area.
I mean, I've seen one of these drones entering in a compound, which is quite unique, because normally you don't see the entire drone footage on FPV drone when it get in, because normally it's very depending by the drone, but most of the time it cut out and you just see the explosion. But yes, it's not very good, because you have this long cable that need to essentially spoil out without entanglement. But what I always say immediately after is that it doesn't look as effective in a sense, in a maneuver sense, because you can see by looking at the video, you can see that it's very goofy movement. Everything is smoothed, and I would not be surprised if on a software point of view, the operator has the gain of his controller toned down, because you can see that in order to maneuver, it has some inertia. So it doesn't allow you to do those very acrobatic change of direction, those very steep change in speed, which characterize FPV drone and made them so formidable and very dangerous weapon for anyone in a trench or on a armored vehicle. Instead, the fiber optic cable is much slower. This is an example of different FPV. Electric W. That one, and if you go back, there is this one is directly from these channel from the Russian that are categorizing different. Of course, now this is I think is for the 500 or 700 megahertz, and now they change the frequency. You can see the 3 antenna on most of the vehicle. At the very beginning, you could spot these everywhere on many vehicles, and then they start to use also these Excalibur. So essentially, this is like a metallic rod with an antenna, and this was used for 900 megahertz. And this, at least from what some soldiers were saying, was used by special forces or dropped by drone to create these small area. This has a battery, so it has a limited amount of time, but allowed them to, put pressure and also uncertainty on where they would move. So because FPV drone can be also used as a last resort, as a recon option. So I think one part of the success of Kursk, and this also put more to the what Andrew was saying before about the fact that this was a very well planned operation. There was a very well planned understanding of the level of threat, what to expect, how to execute, and how to prepare every vehicle, every brigade that would participate in a way that would be effective. Because you can see that when these EW were not available on the vehicle, they had this new cage, which were very much different from anyone you have seen around, which are with this kind of flexible tent that can cover the entire tank, but can also be removed. Here I was also discussing the fact that there is, as both Andrew and Mirko said, there was like a very long campaign of drone strike of different type, FPV and other type, to destroy substation and the communication system at the early stage. I think one of the first was in May.
Talking about this campaign for preparing, the next stage, I see a lot of activity Russian-wise back in Zaporizhia, and especially around the Velika Novosilka. That's how I predicted the attack on the left, because it's a mirror of pretty much what the Ukrainians did in Kursk, and the same is happening on the left of Robotine at the moment. So we know that they want to reopen these fronts, even if we know there is a lot of defenses, a lot of minefields made by the Ukrainians. Sometimes there is a small recon group, on the part of Kamyansky, going to check the Ukrainian activity. And Ukrainians removed a lot of units from Robotine. I think there is only left 3 of the 12, 15 original units in that zone. They are very stretched out in that front.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area. We are also tracking to see which units are getting moved there. And for now, we haven't really gotten hold of many Russian units, but for some Ukrainian units, we know that they're likely around this area. But I gotta say, I have to go now. I wish you all a very nice stream for the rest of it. And see you around, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Gesh.
How did I leave this?
I think the biggest tell for that area is that Ukraine is building a brand new defensive line behind it. And that should tell you something. And also the orientation of this defensive line, it's not east to west, it's north to south. So yeah, I think Ukraine is preparing to I think the logical outcome of what Russia's doing right now is a battle for Zaporizhzhia city. And I think that's kind of where all the trajectories are leading to right now. And I think both sides are kind of preparing groundwork for attacking the city of Zaporizhzhia. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but I think all of these are just kind of like building blocks to get there. So like, Ukraine is building these defenses, especially to protect it from the east and from the southeast. Russia is building offensive power slowly. It's not readily apparent yet, but slowly they're going to want to push north towards Stepnohursk. And also they want to swing through the east, this kind of like continuing this attack from people say Pokrovsk is the goal, but it's not. It's Zaporizhzhia. They want to swing east all the way to the river.
I think
very
they're going
long
to-
range. It's a long distance at this point, but I think this is their goal.
They go around Pokrovsk, to be honest. The most easy way to cut Pokrovsk is go to Selidove, Shevchenko, Odachne. Then you cut pretty much the roads behind Pokrovsk. You don't need to siege it exactly like they're doing in Velika Novosilka. They're going to move from the sides of Velika Novosilka, but the movement itself that they are doing now, between Constantinople, it will make Kurakove completely useless. The biggest problem for Ukraine is that they don't have a defensive line pretty much behind Pokrovsk. Yes, they are doing something, as you said, north to south, but the best defensive lines, they already crossed by the Russians. They were all between Avdiivka and Pokrovsk itself. So yeah, the main objective, in my opinion, is to go what I call Quatre Bras, who likes historical references, where Napoleon pretty much was going towards Waterloo. There is 4 roads intersection, which are behind pretty much Huliapole, Velika Novosilka, and that's pretty much needed to make the entire front from Huliapole to Kurakove to become useless for the Ukrainians. And that's a necessary step to go to be pretty much towards Zaporizhzhia and the Dnieper.
Because if Russia captures Zaporizhzhia, the war is basically over. Ukraine basically lost at that point. So I think that's kind of their win the war as quickly as possible. I think that's really Russia's goal, is to just end the war and you end it by capturing Zaporizhia. And if that isn't enough, you capture Dnipro, and then that's over.
If you accept this map, you can see this clearly with the logistics. Is it things we try to teach to the people? Stop watching videos about things that explode. Watch the roads, watch the topography, watch the logistics, because that's what can tell you a lot about predicting, movement and intentions in that sense.
Yeah, and then there's another little area that I keep my eye on, and it's if you go to Hulipol and to the west of it, there's the Vakhina Tersa. I think this town is going to be of absolute vital importance whenever Russia decides to attack. I don't know when that will be. They're not there yet. It's going to be a while.
You need to give me directions.
Hulipole to the south. It's the city in Zaporizhia, other than Orchakiv. Orkhiv. Go to the east. Yes.
Orkhiv and
go east.
Even more east.
Yeah, that's Hulipole.
There, yeah.
And then to the west of that is a little town. If you follow the train track up to the west of Hulipole, there's a little town on the train track called Vakhina Tersa, and it is the primary logistical hub of pretty much everything going on around Hulipole to the west. Yes.
If you go more north on Huliapole, you see Oleksandrivka, which is exactly north. That's where all the roads pretty much connect. And there's all the roads that bring logistics to Huliapole, Velika Novosilka, Konstantinopil, Kurakove, Pokrovsk, etc. If they take this area between Voldimirivka, Medzove, Oleksandrivka, Pokrovske, you control this, everything that is south or east from that is completely useless. And there is not many geographical peculiarity here that the Ukrainian can, exploit to mount and defense. It's a very rural area with a lot of fields, small rivers that they can exploit, but they're all linked pretty much to the line of Pokrovsk.
The fields are Ukraine's greatest asset, though. It's as long as they have a field to defend, Ukraine does pretty good.
Yeah, but the Russians changed tactics. Now they're using pretty much all the tree lines, or even
great. That's great.
For example, the roads, railroads. They use the railroads to cut between Selidove, Shevchenko, and that's what they are doing between Kurakov and Selidove. There was two big railroad lines, with massive, and the Ukrainians try to mount and defense there, and they simply avoided that by taking it more north or south. It's pretty predictable as a defensive line.
I think what Andrew is talking about, and you're probably talking about the same thing, is that the Russians, yes, they did try some maneuver warfare, but they've basically constrained themselves to taking one field at a time and moving along the tree lines. And you can see this on the map. It's not just because Andrew is drawing a square because it's easier on the map. It's because that's the way they're moving.
No, it's the same. If you watch our map and you go to the last Russians, bridgeheads or advance, they're either linked to a line of tree or a smaller road or a railroad. It's pretty predictable how they are moving.
Yeah. But that predictability can also be defended, because if you're forcing them to move along these tree lines, and especially the rail lines, you can block them. You can physically cut down the trees, rip up the rail line, and put a minefield.
So I think Andrew is thinking more in how can we slow this down for as long as possible before they reach the Dnipro. and it's
which is correct. I mean, the dreams about kicking the Russians out of Ukraine or return to the 1991 border, it was a dream even last summer. Take no offense. The most feasible strategy for a country like Ukraine with less demographics, the less industry, and less capabilities than a bigger nation is a Finnish kind of defense. Defend in a layered type of defense, making the losses so huge that at certain point is not worth continuing a war. The arsenal of the Russian is not infinite. All the Ukrainians need to do is pretty much hold the line and inflict enough losses so they waste their Soviet heritage. Then the game is over. What they produce is not enough to sustain all these armies, and that's a fact sustained by thousands and thousands of videos where you can see only 20% of new vehicles in the total of thousands and thousands of losses. The problem was, in my opinion, which I was against the offensive in 2023, is to waste such resources for impossible objective. It was impossible based on the number of the resource that they had, tanks that they received, and most important, it have no surprise whatsoever. It was the most obvious place because it had a lot of sense in strategic way, removing the corridor which link Donetsk to Zaporizhia to Crimea, but it was also the most obvious point. And the Russians know it. They made defense. They placed millions of mines. So, in my opinion, they should have stopped that operation after 2 weeks when it was clear they were not going to make a huge advantage. To give you an idea on the plan, which was, by the way, published by Zaluzhny, by Tolkien, etc., they wanted to reach, if I remember correctly, Robotin after 48 hours. That give you an idea if that is, it took them 3 months and a half.
Well, I mean, they got there in like the first 2 days, I think. It's hard to piece it together exactly. It's just that it didn't go well. It didn't go well.
No.
But they did get there. They did get there. There was a lot of really powerful Russian propaganda making it look like Ukraine was barely advancing. But if you compare that footage to the satellite imagery, it's obvious Ukraine got there really fast. And then they got stuck.
Yeah, that's the point. They reached the goal in a couple of days, and that's it. They never moved elsewhere. I mean, you should have stopped at that point. I understand there's a lot of political meanings in the sense you need to show the Western that you are on the offensive and you're gaining, but that's a very short time mind. In the overall picture of what's going on in attritional warfare, they need to think, okay, this offense is not going anywhere. Maybe we should preserve what we have to a defensive status. What really astonished me was the fact that when the offensive was over, besides the blaming between Zaluzhny, Syrskyi, and Zelensky, yes, it's over, no, it's not over, etc., was the fact they were not prepared in terms of reserves for what's going after. Either if it was going well or going bad, there was no plan. So then suddenly they started to making defenses everywhere. And that means they didn't plan for a long term. It's like they placing all the eggs in one basket. We're going to do this offensive. This offensive is going to take the corridor in Zaporizhia. Game over. That's a very short-term planning.
I think that was also influenced by Kharkiv offensive and Kherson one, which were very well paced, and also there is also that component of luck because they were able to strike in position where the Russian deployed very bad troops. So in Kharkiv especially, they were able to essentially unleash hell even on artillery position that found themselves essentially on the line of combat. And so they thought, oh, maybe this is going to happen again. But this is, I really don't understand how this could be possible, because the defensive position were documented from OSINT and also non-OSINT. We have seen on satellite imagery these.
Before it started, we have all mapped by 10 meters. Everybody knows it. So it's a very different things. What happened in Kharkiv, it was a sort of maskirovka made by the Ukrainians, in the sense that they announced the Kherson offensive, etc. And if you look at the dislocations of the tactical units of the Russian, the brigades, like 80% was between pretty much the corridor, Kherson, Zaporizhia, etc. And in the north, there was like just 18 very battered down, units. They didn't consider, probably the success even surprised the Ukrainians.
Yeah, I think as well, because I remember that even crossing Oskil River was like something that they took some time before saying, okay, let's go and cross the river as well. And if you remember, when they were attacking Kherson, I remember these days that they became more than days where they were trying to pushing through Kherson, and there was resistance, and then suddenly this happened. And I think with Andrew we were working a bit more in that time together, and I remember there was a direction that we both agreed that was much better at that point to try, but they completely ignored. Do you remember, Andrew, which was that? Because I think the offensive, and then I stopped this, but I think that was too large as well for the resources that they had. Too many places where they tried to push, and instead they may wanted the best with those resources was to point on a smaller scale operation if you really want to do some good results, also political but also tactical, and push somewhere where you can have a easy victory, and then you get some experience, some combat experience, and then you can carry on with the defensive. But there was a specific direction that Andrew was talking about at that time, but I don't remember. Do you remember?
Check the image, because I still have the old map with the location of the Russian units at the time, which I use in conference. And that tells you a lot how the Ukrainian foolish the Russians with their same tactics. Maskirovka is known since 1923. That was at the time location of the tactical battle groups of Russia. You can see pretty much all the army was on the south. There was nobody in the north.
At the time last year, personally, I thought Ukraine should have attacked the Lysychansk oil refinery. That's what I would have gone through. Verkhnokamianka. That would have been like my goal if I were in charge, and my secondary goal would have been Krasnohorivka. I would want to capture those two places. If I were to attack south, I would have wanted to attack southwest towards I can't remember. It was like out of Malinivka. I would have attacked out of Malinivka and Poltavka and moved southeast from there, because I think that was the area of Russia's weakest defensive line. I don't think they really had many minefields in that area. I think you could have broken through if you really wanted to, although I don't really think that would have been smart anyway. But I think just taking the hill of Verkhnokamianka, taking that hill would have given Ukraine a lot of better defensive options for holding Bilohorivka and Siversk, and I think it would have stabilized this whole area. And not that it's unstable, it just would have been better. And taking Krasnohorivka, I think, would have made it possible to hold Avdiivka, because when they launched that attack without taking Krasnohorivka, they just let Russia have it, and they attacked somewhere else. That was them ceding Avdiivka. It was basically them saying, Russia, take it.
So since we are on this ground, people are always asking me, what's the point of studying military history? You have nothing to do with what's going on now. I show them things like this. This is Operation Friderikus Second, how the Wehrmacht attacked in the position of Kupiansk, Izium, and this is the direction of the Ukrainians, pretty much carbon copy, is the same one, if the morphology remains the same. I want to bring a topic, how you see the Bakhmut situation related to the offensive and Avdiivka situation. You know, there is a big debate. The Bakhmut pretty much compromised Zaporizhia offensive because it was a diversion of forces and of troops. What's your point on this? You know, the long debate, let's retreat, not retreat, or let's try to retake it by encircling it.
I think the attacks in Bakhmut, especially the south, the northern part of Bakhmut, I think people underestimate how close Ukraine was to a complete success. But the southern part, I think, was vital, because the first thing that they did was retake everything around Ivanivska and push Russia back across the canal. Because think about how bad the situation would be right now if they never did this attack. Russia had crossed the canal in multiple places. They had complete control of the entire canal. So if they still had that level of power over the canal right now, they would be flanking Toretsk from the north. It would be or both of flanking Chasiv Yar from the south. Either way, it would have been a disaster for Ukraine right now. I think that alone was a giant success. Right now, Russia has pushed Ukraine back to the canal. So they basically each control one side of the canal at this point. So I think pushing them back to the canal, pushing them across the canal, restabilizing Ivanivska and pushing into Klashivka, I think was all very good. The number of casualties Russia took around Andriivka and then Klashivka were astronomical. We have access to a very large amount of video that was never published of just Russians moving up and then falling asleep and then moving up and then falling asleep. Very sleepy Russians, just incredibly sleepy. And I think it was a huge success. There were points in this offensive where they took enormous casualties, and I think a lot of those casualties were from lack of intelligence. And I think that lack of intelligence was because they wasted so much stuff in the south that, like, stupidly, I think if you had given these forces the intelligence they needed, the satellite experts, that sort of analysis, using SAR and all of those tools to better inform this whole operation, I think they could have done more with fewer casualties, but they didn't have access to enough, in my opinion. The northern attack was extremely close to a huge success. It was literally within hours of a Ukrainian massive breakthrough in this north, but it just failed. It just, like, at the last second, Russia had just enough reinforcements that they could pull in an emergency to stop the Ukrainian attack, and then it just all fell apart. But it was so close to an actual legit breakthrough in this north, and that would have totally changed the whole conversation. But it just didn't work. It was so close. I think the attack around Bakhmut was all very good. And the attack that people don't talk about so much is the attack towards Pisky, which was they did not give them enough resources. Like they gave them like a battalion or like 2 battalions or something. They should have been given like 3 or 4 brigades to do what they needed to do, because they could have stabilized this whole southern approach. They were so close to retaking the defensive positions between Pisky and Vodiana. I think if they had, another 2,000 or 3,000 guys, they may have been able to pull it off. If they had retaken this position Slab, which is the name of the defensive position between Vodiana and Pisky, if they'd retaken that, it would have fundamentally changed the whole picture of everything going on in Avdiivka, because you would have been able to hold this southern front with far fewer men, instead of leaning on Sevierna, which was supposed to be your backstop. You could lean on Slab, which was supposed to be your primary defensive position that they gave up without a fight. So having Slab connected to Zenit in it's the way it was supposed to be in one continuous defensive line, then you could have, put those forces into the north and, defended Krasnohorivka better.
Also because they have a lot of historical meaning. The battle for the airport of Donetsk have a longer history.
Yeah, and this whole area is so important. I mean, they fought for a reason in this area. Like, it wasn't arbitrary. It was because these were good defensive positions that.
So I think after all, the story of Bakhmut to give us after what happened, a lot of information. For example, if you look at the analysis of the losses of the Russians in this period, 50% is Wagner. So it's like Wagner and his prisoners, immolate themselves to give the Russians time to rebuild their army. Because if you look at the time it took to take Bakhmut and who was involved, you realize that the rest of the army and the fronts were not doing much. All the battle was pretty much Bakhmut. That was the main focus. And the Wagner took the majority of the losses. And then once they took Bakhmut, Wagner was completely useless for its purpose. And, the rest, it's history. The majority of the problems I see from the Western side is that when we look at what the Russians did, we tend to demise them, Wagner is taking a lot of losses, not going to look at what that could mean for the rest of the army. If you take the number of losses and you divide them by volunteers, conscript, Wagnerites, etc., you realize that 60-70% were Wagnerites, 20% were volunteers, mobiks. Only 10% were the professional part of Russia. That means that the destruction of the Wagner was on a purpose. You remove a problematic guy with a lot of influence, and you give time to the Russian army to rebuild. So back then, a lot of people give a lot of importance to Bakhmut. It's strategic. If Bakhmut falls, Ukraine falls. They didn't watch the canals. I mean, even today, after 2 years that we are talking about Bakhmut, the Russians still 1 kilometer in some points in Chasiv Yar. Bakhmut will not lead to anything unless they were able instantly to make a bridgehead on Chasiv Yar. 2 years later, we're still here. The biggest problem is looking this on the biggest picture. Chasiv Yar and Toretsk are necessary to each other. If one falls, the other falls, because you will be taken by the flank. If Toretsk fall, the next retreat point for the Ukrainians will be Kostiantynivka. If Chasiv Yar falls, Toretsk will fall. And these are necessary steps, these three cities, to get a reach on Zlovyansk and Kramatorsk. So it's all connected in the big picture. So I do believe that the salient in Pokrovsk is not about Pokrovsk. Also because it will be stupid if you manage to have a breakthrough, you're going to lose all your momentum into a siege for Pokrovsk. Doesn't make any sense to me. It will have much more sense to cut and going to remove all the logistic roads. Also because at the moment, the Russians are 6 kilometers from cutting all the roads that goes to Pokrovsk. And if you look at their movements, Vishneve, Frihorivka, Petrivka, they are trying to do the smallest route to reach Shevchenko. And that will be the next step for going to take Udachin probably. So they are evolving. It's the same things that happen when we look at the North Koreans, Oh, it's North Koreans. I mean, they don't know how to fight. They're very poor. They have things from the 60s, from the 70s. We tend to look at this stuff like is a joke. The same happened with the Shahed drones. Remember when the Shahed drones with small engine were flying around at 150 kilometers an hour? Everybody was laughing at them. I didn't laugh. I watched what the Houthi were doing with these drones when they attacked Saudi Arabia, and cost effective. In 2017, if I remember correctly, the Houthi launched an attack with like 80 drones that were given them by the Iranians, and they caused 140 million damage on Saudi Arabia installations, which, by the way, had Patriot defensive system, etc. So you need to look cost effective. Even today, which, by the way, the Russian come back to do the strategic campaign against the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, you will see 120 missiles, 80, 90 drones just to saturate the air defenses. So after what happened, I tend to look at what's going on with much different eye and analyze the situation, not as they are, as we see, but what this situation can mean in the long term. And I don't know if you come to same conclusion when you see this kind of way of the West of looking at stuff that is not coming from us with a very criticized eye.
Do you mean like the problem of a lack of proactive measures and from the West?
No, I mean the problem that we tend to look whatever happens from the Russian side or Iranian drones, etc. Like, it's not important stuff. They're not going to have a big impact, etc. I think the Shahed drone have the big impact on consuming the air defenses of Ukrainians.
I think it goes deeper than that. I don't think it's poo-pooing those people. I don't think it's poo-pooing Russia and Iran and whatever. I think it's looking down upon people who aren't in the industry, their industry, because they think that their industry is above people, that they know more. We work in this. We're the geniuses. You're all peasants. Like in the beginning of the war, I was a big proponent of sending propeller planes to Ukraine to defend against drones. And I still think is what should be done. Everyone thinks it's a joke. Oh, how can a propeller plane fight in a modern war? How can it fight? It will be shot down by missiles. What missiles? You can't shoot a missile into Odessa, an anti-aircraft. It doesn't work like that. It's like, and then we see like the Yak flying around shooting down Orleans and stuff, Imagine if we had sent planes early on, because we have planes. We could have sent planes. They're cheap, a few $1 million each, and Ukraine has pilots. They could have just flown the planes, and they could have.
I mean, even the Americans have think back to use instead the A-10 Warthog using Super Tucano against insurgency, because it flies low and you can do CAS and things like that.
Yeah, but the people, they get so stuck on this, like technology always has to be, one step ahead. Every step is one step ahead. But the old technology still works. And these needs, like the new technology is too expensive to handle these needs. Like
we are starting to realize that. If you see the last study of Kiel Institute, they say maybe we should not have sent all that tanks that we had to dismantle, the 3,000 tanks we had 20 years ago, because they could be useful. We call these with Lanzara, which is an analyst, high-low, in the sense, yes, it's good to have your F-35 and your super technology, but it's also good to have a lot of low stuff. because what we have seen in this war is that when two, let's say, professional army collide to each other, they tend in a couple of months to lose a lot of people, and then it will be very complicated to use your super shiny stuff.
Yeah, so this is the concept of overmatching, which has been the main focus of Western armies for the last 40, 50 years, really, that you always need to be on top of the technology game, on top of the logistics game, but especially in the technology game where you have capabilities which will overmatch your opponents, so that you think that when you arrive to the point of conflict, when a war actually erupts, you will be able to overcome your enemy completely,
Yeah.
overrun it, and take out them strategic and not just operationally.
What's going on if you don't knock out
Yes.
your enemy in the first week?
That's the problem. That's what we're looking at right now. And that's basically Russia's problem here. Like, they didn't knock out Ukraine in the first 3 weeks, which
is an interesting lesson, Erlend, because they formed their tactical battle groups based on what we were doing in the last 20 years. In the sense, they saw what we were doing in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and say, okay, we need an easy to deploy army with the units that are able to do everything, a bit of artillery, a bit of infantry, vehicles, tanks, etc. The problem is when you bring this kind of formations into an attritional warfare, suddenly your logistic is a nightmare, because every of these small unit of 800 people, maximum 1,200, need pretty much ammunition for everything, artillery, SPG, tanks, etc. And also your infantry part is so small that they can't hold ground or take ground.
Yeah.
And then there is the multiplication of commands. When you have so many small units, if you want to face, I don't know, a brigade, you need to coordinate the 3, 4, 5 tactical battle groups. So the chain of command multiply, and it's like the old game of the paper phone, with the glass, where you say a word and then you pass that word. It complicates everything. That's the biggest problem we have, because in the last 20, 30 years, we fight pretty much enemies that were not near peer. Desert Storm it doesn't count. So we have shock and awe, now we have multi-domain warfare. The problem is that to make something like that work, you need professional people. That requires years and years of training, and there's not something you can do whenever you will face a near peer opponent, and suddenly 60-70% of your professional people is gone in the first 3 months. Then you return to mass recruiting, simple systems, and that's where Russia, in a sense, have an edge, because they have a lot of old stuff, easy to use, where you can train people for 3 months and it's fine. You can't do the same stuff with Bradleys and Abrams, also multiplying the logistics, which is a nightmare for the Ukrainians. They have 17 different artillery systems. German tanks, British tanks, Polish tanks, American tanks. It's not that Swedish stuff. It's not that easy. Even if they try to use some coherence, like giving to a certain unit only Abrams or a certain unit only SV90, still a nightmare logistical wise. So we need to exit from this idea that, war is something we can relegate to a small amount of professional people. No. When you have near peer armies, you will need to recruit back a lot of people, and these people can't use your F-35 or your shiny Abrams X.
And also, when we're in this new era where we are actually looking at near peer wars as the next war, then it is absolutely incredible to see how long it takes for European armies to understand that they need to go back to conscript soldiers, to build up reservists, to have a national plan for what is going to happen in mobilization, and not just mobilization in the military, but also in the civilian society, etc.
In Italy, we can't even mobilize. I mean, we sold pretty much all the stuff that were even the structures. For example, if a war breaks tomorrow to India, I have no idea, even if they call me, where to go. Very different is for the Finnish and the others. In Finland, every years they have a couple of weeks of training, etc. So they are able to, if wars happens, people know exactly where to go, who is going to lead in your small town, and things like that. We completely abolish this kind of stuff. Even the thinking that we may need, it is useful to have a system like that and never use it if you are lucky, but you need to have it. The fact that we completely avoid to talk about, and we don't have any more a structure that we can make something like this is a big problem. That's why we struggle to build up an industry, and even talking about maybe national reserve like American does.
Yeah, on this regard, I would like to add just a comment. I think what this war teach to us, I mean, first of all, regarding the difficulties in using equipment, I can say that one of the things that we need to realize that most of weapon system for army, so I'm not talking about fighters or high-end vehicle, tank are included in this category, so tank are not that high tech as you can imagine. They are very complex machine. Probably the logistic and the need of maintenance is much more complex rather than using a tank. And this because when the tanks were developed, Leopard 2, Leopard 1, Abrams, we were still in Cold War and we were still training people take from high school. Even if you think to US, the basic training start from soldier that didn't even start the university. So the problem is not that these systems are too complex to train on, but the problem is that is the trainer. So how much capability you have to mobilize your citizens and make them becoming proficient soldier that can stand and survive months after months. Because I followed a lot of UK analysts and MOD person talking about this problem, because the first echelon in a large scale combat operation will completely deplete your professional, and so you will fight this with a second echelon made by what we now in UK we start to talk open about a citizen army. So an army that is made by people that were not working as soldiers. So you need to train them, and you need to develop a system that is capable of doing this. And one of the problems that we have at the moment is, do we have such system? Because look at what is happening to Ukraine. We are trying to train these people in Europe, but we cannot train like 20,000 a month. We can train in UK, which is doing a very large effort in a year, which is not
Also,
even.
we are training them with stupid taxes that have nothing to do with the war they are making, because that's
Maybe at the beginning. Now it's been changed, luckily. But I agree. Is actually from the type of war. In a future war, what would happen is that people who survive the first echelon will come back, and with those with these people, you have to train the second one and the third one if you need. And is that what happened in Second World War? In 1941, essentially most of the Allied were training. And this is something that is missing now, because if you want to have a meaningful outcome of this war, Ukraine have to train its own army to even think to go to the offensive when
that's the
you have
thing that
depleted.
South Koreans fear about North Koreans
Yeah,
involvement.
I agree. And this is probably, hopefully, the things that tip the iceberg, because the fact that South Korea start to send a military attaché in Ukraine is much better than all the empty words of Biden and many others, honestly. And just to conclude my intervention before we go back on Kursk, the main point is that, and I talk this also because it's part of my normal job, is the production of war material. We were unprepared. We were completely unprepared to produce even body armor to a scale that is required. So, I mean, this is something that have to change in the West, because, of course, some weapon systems are very complex to produce, but we cannot think that producing 12 howitzer a year is something decent, like France is doing right now, which is obscene. So if Ukraine is able to do that number in a month, we need to be at least double that, because, or at least have demonstrated that we have the capability to scale up if needed. Because otherwise, we demonstrated that it took 2 years to improve UK ammunition production for artillery. So if this war was raging much deeper in Europe, we would be very much in dire condition. So I think there are a different level where we have to do homework. And I agree with you. In Italy, they sold all the barracks. Essentially, they made a very nice apartment, but there is no more space. In UK, this is not happening because barracks are kept.
Yeah, we
Maybe in
completely
war condition.
dismantled everything, sold, and nobody think maybe one day we will need them. No, or maybe we need a substitute system. Zero whatsoever. We delegate pretty much our protection to NATO, and we didn't think that in the future we would need a bigger army than our professionals. To give you an idea, at the current consuming rate of ammunition in Ukraine, the Italian army have maybe 2 or 3 days, maybe a week in the best scenario of ammunition.
Yeah, which is a disaster.
Okay, I think we can maybe try and wrap up the whole like Kursk thing, which is, in my opinion, it's entering into a larger picture of all these different topics that we have discussed. And if I understand all of you correctly, what's the goal for Ukraine? What the overall goal? It's to slow down the Russians and attrit their forces until the Russians are no longer able to pull out this Soviet heritage, as you so nicely called it. And the question then is, did this operation, or is it looking like this operation has led to an extension of the Russians' fighting capability, or do you think a shortening in the sense that it's actually cut down the time they have on this Russian heritage?
I think it's detrimental to the Ukrainians, to be honest, considering that these units of Russia are going to gain experience. Yeah, they're going to have a lot of losses, but they don't care. And on the other side, the Ukrainians are pretty much losing, in my opinion, things that are not replaceable, like Challengers, Leopards, etc. All the political meaning and strategic advantage, it was already accomplished in the first 2 weeks. They executed the operation well. They made a lot of prisoners, caused a lot of losses, political unrest, showed that the red lines were not there, showed that they were able to do an operation like this in silence. 90% of what you could achieve was done in the first 2 weeks. My fear is that now is slowly reversing into a situation where the more the times go, the more the Russians have advantage than what the Ukrainians can gain from this situation, beside the fact that they probably need to have this salient as long as we go to have some peace talking. After that, unless they gain something from this, in my opinion, will be useless. And you see, recently Putin have said there will be no talk unless, as long as there is an Ukrainian in Kursk. So it's a precondition for talk. Admitted that this peace talk have any value, which I don't think Putin want to have a real peace talks, but it's becoming pretty much a preliminary point of discussion. No Ukrainians in Kursk.
That's kind of true. He said that there would be no talk as long as people are in Kursk. And then 2 months later, they started talking again because he couldn't kick them out.
Yeah, that's the point.
He gave
That's
himself
the
2
point.
months to kick them out and then gave up. He was like, okay, fine, whatever.
Yeah, that's the point. It's a torn a spine, that is hitting him. It's a problem, but not that big of a problem after all. I mean, it's a question of time. Let's face it. It could be a month, could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. The Ukrainian can't sustain that situation indefinitely.
No, but you can look at it the other way. What Ukraine needs more than anything is experience for their brigades. It's one of their biggest problems. And right now, those brigades are getting experience in Pokrovsk, in Toretsk. They're getting their butts kicked. They're losing a lot of ground, but they're getting experience. So you could say that what Ukraine is doing now is laying the groundwork for a future success where they might have more brigades that are combat capable in the future by giving them the experience now. And the results that they're giving currently is very bad, but hopefully in the future, their experience will make them more successful.
Yeah, but it's the same game they're doing to Russia. The problem is they can afford it. You can't.
Well, can Russia afford it though? Because Russia,
it's 3
is
years,
running out
they
of
are
men.
affording 20,000 losses a month. Clearly, they can better than the Ukrainians. I mean, it's Darwinism, military Darwinism. Okay, the problem is that you are doing that with 5 times more demographics.
Is it though? Do they have more men? That's the question. Because when this war started, Russia pretty much said they had 5 million men to work with, and they can't really dip into that. I guess like the Koreans that they bring in don't count towards that because they're not Russian. But if you're going by the numbers that Russia goes with, they had about 5 million men to work with, and I'm not so sure that Ukraine has too many fewer than that. I'm not really convinced that the manpower difference is that great, but I think what Russia is better at is getting their manpower into combat, and especially doing it quickly. So in the long run, this may not benefit Russia because Russia has to win. They have to win the war, whereas Ukraine has to outlast
Need to
Russia.
survive with
So-
where they need to win. But if you
Yeah.
look at the demographics between 20 and 28, they have a similar demographics. If you look at the tree, the Ukrainians have 700,000 people between that area, and the Russians have 4.5 millions in that area. Admitted that they want to waste their better human resource into this war, which is not very wise for the future. That's why Ukraine is trying to avoid, to send this kind of people for the future. But I don't think you can play this attritional warfare by using your worst brigades and let them make experience, especially when you send cooks, or at certain point they were sending expert artillerymen as infantrymen in certain situations, which is a waste. Because just because you don't have ammunition in that moment, you should not waste an experienced artilleryman for an infantry jobs. And I think you have read a lot of complaints between the Ukrainian brigades where they say, don't send to us people that have this low amount of expertise because they endanger themselves and they endanger the others. They want, yes, replacement, but they need replacement with much more training. That's the biggest problem that they have. Now they have these systems where, pretty much the brigades choose who to get, and you can ask to join certain brigades. But before, they were getting replacement, and this is pretty much disclosed by the units itself, which they were lasting less than 48 hours on the field.
Yeah, and Russia is having all the same sorts of problems. Like pretty much every problem they both have the same problems. Everybody has the same problems. And I feel like any other country in this situation would have the same problems. It's like these are the problems of a war, I guess.
Yeah, the problem are similar, is the capabilities are completely different. Also because Russia have much bigger training infrastructures. If you look at how many academy they have, how many training ground, I'm not going to talk about quality of this, training, but quantity, the capabilities to mobility, and even them, they had a lot of problems, because if you look at when they tried to recruit this 300,000 in October, of 2022, there was a lot of problems building up again the recruitment machine. Now it's a little smoother. They every 6 months they get more trained people beside the contract Nikki, etc. But they still can't do another batch of recruitment like mobilization. They avoid the mobilization at all cost. Everybody that comes, they have this offer to join with a lot of money, but they try to avoid mobilization. Remember the 1 million Russians that left the country when everything started? That were also the most instructed people in the IT world, etc. It's not the guy that work on the field that runs to the west or the other country. It's the guy that knows. And that's a big loss, especially in the IT world.
Yeah, and if they've lost tons of doctors, they've lost engineers, especially electronic engineers. Not electronic, the electrical infrastructure engineers, and linemen too. Lost a lot of linemen. That I don't even know how you replace. Honestly, how do you replace your entire fleet of linemen? I don't know.
Last factor, new strategic campaign against the Ukrainian infrastructure. They started again. They did exactly like last year. For some months, they sparely made the launch. I think the last one was 26 or 28 August. And now they are starting again in winter. Unlucky this time, it seems that it will be a much colder winter than it was 2022 or 2023.
Yeah. So that's one of the few points that I have left over from additional points or additional topics. Reaction of Poland and in the recent missile strike of Sunday. I think I have a feeling, and that's a warning that this isn't the fact that we know, but I have a feeling that Poland is trying to soften up a little bit the sort of impression a lot of European leaders and opinion makers have towards a possible intervention in the airspace of Ukraine to a limited extent, where we're not talking about closing the skies or making a no-fly zone or something like this, but enhancing Ukraine's Western air defenses with an air.
Yeah, I agree completely. They try to slowly introduce,
the
that
concept.
maybe we're going to cover, or we fly on the border between Poland and Ukraine and we can intercept from here. You start to slowly introduce the idea, adapt the people to the concept. I think also that the North Korean involvement, it will open a Pandora situation, in the sense the Polish have a lot of South Korean weapons. What will happen if suddenly South Korea say, okay, let's give Ukraine some of the Chunmo, which is the equivalent of the HIMARS, or things that we have already given to the Polish, and the Polish give them to the Ukrainians, and then we can give them back to the Polish. I think the involvement of a third country for real, not like Belarus, will open also an involvement of others, in the sense if the Russian can say, we have the help of another nation, of course, only in Russia, in the Kursk area, what is going to block the Ukrainians to say, okay, we have involvement of other troops just in Ukrainian territory? And that is a scenario that reminds me Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, I have one comment about this air defense thing, because Ukraine has two contradictory goals. first, they want to open up their airspace to commercial travel. And second, they want help shooting down Russian stuff. These are completely contradictory, because if you want help shooting down things, you cannot have commercial aviation, because there's no realistic way to ensure you're not going to shoot down commercial aviation. You can try your hardest, you can do lots of things, but you cannot guarantee you're not going to shoot down commercial planes. So if you're going to start lobbing around NATO anti-aircraft missiles around Ukraine, no commercial aviation. But this commercial aviation is also one of Ukraine's huge goals of like this year. Like they want commercial aviation this year, I think into Kyiv, right? So these are contradictory. They cannot both happen. And I think this is one big reason why NATO doesn't want to get involved with shooting down things, because they're afraid of their commercial aviation. They don't want another, MH17 type thing. So, and it doesn't even necessarily involve aviation in Ukraine. There could be like a buffer zone around Ukraine, which could influence other countries. So this is a real problem that isn't really talked about. So, and it makes me not really believe that countries are going to actually help Ukraine shoot down stuff. And it's because of the commercial aviation. I don't think it's ever been about Russia. I think it's always been about the commercial stuff. Because they, like imagine a scenario where you're shutting down the airspace of like Hungary to shoot down missiles in Ukraine, because you might have to do that, or Slovakia or Poland. And I don't think those countries will be happy doing that. They might talk like Poland might talk about like their willingness to shoot down stuff, and maybe it would be slightly different if you're using air-to-air missiles. That might be maybe a little bit more safe than ground-to-air missiles. But I think this is a very real issue.
I mean, the Romanian would be very happy to try to avoid those many crossing of Shahid over their border. And also, I mean, the disaster of MH was pretty much also due to a problem of an open space in a war zone. The system of defense of the border of NATO are much different from just a few buck system around. So I think there must be, probably there is also the worry of something getting much worse in the case of an accident. I agree, but I think that there must be also some consideration of what we do because if you start to shoot down things, then you cannot assume that the other side stays silent and don't try to provoke you or put you in.
Yeah, I mean, Romania have a couple of Patriot systems, and they were very shy to admit that Shahed drones went through their territory. Even their major army general and television was. It took a lot of months to them to admit that there is a lot of problems. I think there is a pressure also inside NATO to not cause an escalation. I remember that story of the missile that entered into Poland. That was Ukrainian, it was Russian. It changed paternity a lot of times because they don't want problem on the border. There is even inside NATO, there is a different views on the story. Of course, the Spanish point of view of this war is much different than the Polish point of view.
Yeah, deconflicting is a thing that NATO have trained a lot on, and also airspace controllers in Europe are included in that picture. Of course, integrating it with Ukraine will be a problem, but hopefully, I just don't think the decision is gonna be standing on this. I think Ukraine would welcome immediately an effort to any sort of intervention from NATO allies to defend the skies or whatever they say, to counter some Russian drones and cruise missiles over Ukrainian soils, I think that would immediately say yes, even if they have to give up on the commercial air traffic. Next point that I had, which is, I hope you have some insights to more than most of us here. In relation with the Trump situation and potential ceasefire deal, which has been pushed a lot in the media lately, I have a couple of questions in relation to Meloni. A few months ago, a very large Ukrainian OSINT team calculated, based on satellite images, that there are still quite substantial parking lots, I would say, of Italian old armored vehicles that I guess would need a quite substantial amount of refurbishment, but in theory could be put into use in Ukraine. And you think in light of the Trump situation, North Korea, and the problems with armored vehicles in general, do you think there's a larger chance you will see Italy push a little bit more for this? And also then another point, Meloni traveled to China not so long ago to sign different trade agreements with the Chinese, and at the same time we see a lot of reports that the Chinese might actually be supplying not necessarily weapons, but direct components or systems that are needed for the operational readiness of the Russian forces. Do you think Meloni could also, in some way, be a broker between Ukraine and China and pressure that situation?
I think you gave it to Italy too much importance. I mean, it's already 3 hours and 12 minutes, and Meloni can't do jack shit. Okay, they spent months making photos. So we are with Ukraine until 1991, when it was convenient. Okay, now that it is not convenient for his own internal problems, etc., they just avoid that. Yes, we have some M113 and some old artillery systems. They are sitting there since 20, 30 years. We try to solve them to Africa many times, and bureaucratic problem and quality problems, of course. I don't think they are in a state where you can refurbish them. Also, who is going to do that? The last time we sent them to Germany, if I remember, to refurbish the last stuff, and some were doing in North Italy. It's not stuff that is going to change much in Ukraine. It's not a couple of very old. Also, they were, if I remember, the chassis was made of aluminium. You know what happens when you leave stuff made of aluminium in open? It becomes brittle, destroy itself pretty much. It's not a very good stuff. What Italy can do more is ammunition, but again, internal laws blocked in Sardinia the expansion of fabric for environmental stuff. Meloni just followed the wave, and now she's going to follow what Trump and the other right is going to do. So Italy is irrelevant in this story, to be honest. Doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The most help Italy can do in this situation, just not be another Orban. It's enough if it stay aligned with the others, but don't expect much from Italy. Yes, we can give it some PT, but we don't have much ammunition, so production for the system also is beneficial to us because we gain a lot of information using SMPT in the real, war environment. But that's it. Don't expect much. I mean, I know there is Ukrainian training in Livorno, Folgore, and other stuff. We also trained the Ukrainians to use of SMPT in Verona, North Italy. That's it. We can give some help in in that sense. But already, if Italy doesn't do Orban style stuff, is already of help. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I know. And I just I got these questions from someone that knew that you were coming, so I had to ask them. And I mean, thank you for being honest.
There is the last question. They ask how much is dependent from gas from Russia. Zero, pretty much at the moment. We are buying from other sources, so there is a leftover. Let's see, we gain stuff from Turkey. Annie had a lot of links with Gazprom before. That's for sure. But we are losing that dependence. Also, recently, you see Austria got this little problem with Gazprom stop selling to them gas because the Austrians needed to give them 230 million because the Russians stopped giving gas to Germany, and their company have also involvement in Germany. But yeah, let's look at this from a strategic point of view. Having a country depending on another country for the supply of a certain thing is not a good thing. So at least we discovered as Europe that we should not be dependent on a certain resource, especially if that resource come from certain kind of nations. The same happens if you need to depend on Iran or turbulent country. So it's better divided. It's like in real life. You have a portfolio where you divide your money, and risk. We should divide also strategic risk in that sense. Yeah, also Azerbaijan is not that great. Yeah, I know. And another thing, and I need to go, but I leave you another topic which for me is very important. Besides the economy for Russia going to 21% inflation rate and things like that, secondary sanctions. If you look how much Poland, Germany, Italy send stuff to Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, you see a skyrocket of 4,000% of many things. Turkey also work as a dealer for stuff that Russia needs. Serbia as well. So in a way, the Russians managed to keep going with their production because there's a lot of countries that help them getting access to secondary markets, acting as dealer. India is one of these countries, and also we have a lot of very smart people in Europe. Greece was buying Russian oil, and they were exchanging in the middle of the sea. And then selling to Europe. India is buying Russian oil, refine it and send to Europe, and we pretend it's Indian. All of this stuff, which cost to Russia more, is anyway keeping their war machine. And we not seems very interested in blocking this kind of stuff. We even make media stuff like, Western production and industry left Russia. It's not true. Coca-Cola just rebranded and sold itself to Dobre Cola. And then when everything changed, Dobre Cola will be rebought by Coca-Cola. That's the game. One of the biggest seller of t-shirt and brand in Russia is Polish. And they keep selling. So there is a way to avoid sanctions, and we are not really doing our best, even if the sanctions are slowly hitting Russia, and it will cause them a lot of problems in the next year and in the years to come. We should have done way better than that, especially looking at the dual-use stuff.
Yes, and Daniele has been talking about this several times before because he's been doing studies on certain factories that the Russians are able to use because of European dual export. Sorry to keep you so long.
No, I give you one last thing. A couple of weeks ago, I got hands of a document where a lot of important people from Germany met with the Putin delegation in Baku, and suddenly Scholz make a phone call with Putin, and I said, if all these people talk, on this important hotel, in Baku, and there is a delegation from Germany and delegation from Putin. Of course, they were talking about energy. It means that the point of view of Putin, it's fine. We are trembling, there is some gaps where he can work, and Scholz, as Zelensky have said, just give to Putin a good stuff for him. When he was completely isolated, and then suddenly Scholz talked with him. We are talking about energy and stuff like that. This is officially, and everybody know that he phoned Putin. 2 weeks before, people from energy and industry of Germany met with people from energy and industry from Russia in Baku. So there is a lot of stuff that happening underground, and then slowly it comes out. But this show a lot of strategic weakness when Germany do something like this, and other countries are trying to help Ukraine. And this is exactly the point where Putin is trying to use his leverage, the division of strategic views of the various countries of Europe, which we say we are Europe, etc. But from a strategic point of view, everybody do their own business and see the involvement in this situation at very different levels.
Yeah. So last, before you go, there's been a lot of people asking in the chat about what we think about the long-range strike announcements, or not really announcements, but reports in the media that the White House have changed the restrictions. We don't know how they changed them, but there are a lot of targets on the Russian sides, and we've mapped some of them. I think Daniele has a lot more that he needs to put into this map, but these are the targets that are within 500 kilometers. That's Storm Shadow, Scalp AEG. How did I do this? Or maybe it's not open for the boundaries, Daniele. I think we lost Daniele. Yeah, but there's a map coming out with the boundaries for the different.
Oh, sorry, I'm back.
Okay.
I just activated my camera rather than the microphone. So, no, in this map we have only the ammo depot, and you can switch to the other type of map if you want to see the ammo depot. And yes, the red target are those within 500 kilometer, and they are pretty much, most of them very old. There are a couple of very new in the 500 domain. The other map, which has a lot more target, which means oil refinery, not oil depot, and also distillery, is private. You can't access from. I have on my computer. I still have to work on that to put before publishing it, unfortunately. But yeah, it has also the let me see if I can share it. Give me 1 minute.
But there is a flourish of targets also other than this. Air defense systems. There are logistic movements, of course.
Yeah.
So the question is, what kind of impact could this have? Also, want to emphasize we don't know what restrictions are still on the Ukrainians, because until I see it, I don't believe they lifted all restrictions.
The question is for me, or
for everyone.
I can say that there was a change of priorities for the Ukraine. If you remember, initially they started attacking all the refineries, etc., and then the effect was small, to be honest. I like the change that they did on the Kursk operation, because instead of hitting airfields, they start hitting deposits. I mean, airplanes are fine, but if they have no bomb to shoot, it's pointless. And that had a much bigger effect. When they hit the Lipetsk, deposit, the effect was so big that it not only lowered the amount of fire ratio of the Russians in Kursk, but also in Donbass, to give you an idea. And they hit also the one in Rostov, So they should hit big deposits, because a couple of planes are not going to make a difference, but if you destroy millions of worth of ammunition, they have a much bigger impact and more direct impact. The biggest problem for the Americans was not the red lines or fear of escalation, but the fact that the majority of the analysts, which are advisors to the Pentagon, etc., you can hear Kaufman and the others, they think it's too late for the Ukrainians to gain benefit from a strategic campaign, in the sense the effects, you will see the effects in a year, etc. And in their opinion, they don't have a year. It's too late, too little, too late. That's the opinion. It's not worth the risk of escalation because it's happening too late. And also there is all the risk of direct involvement, in the sense that Scalp, Storm Shadow, etc. We will need to give them the guidance and things like that. It will be hard to relegate to Ukraine to use them all on their own. That means direct involvement in targeting and maneuvering of these cruise missiles, pretty much, which means direct involvement of pretty much NATO. This is the motivations. So that's why the Ukrainians, on the same time, in the parallel way, they start to developing their own deep strike capabilities, because they were not giving from the NATO partners, and probably they were never given to a level that will make a huge impact in the war itself. I mean, they needed to do this kind of campaign like 2 years ago, starting already, to see the effect today on a huge scale.
Well, I know that maybe Colby can talk about this better, because I see he just showed up. But I know that the U.S. has had a policy of not wanting to shoot across borders into other countries for a long time. I don't fully understand it, but I know that, like, for example, the U.S. didn't want to shoot into Pakistan when we were in Afghanistan, like, for example. And it's a long-standing policy, and they, in my opinion, they are irrationally applying that policy to this war. This war is fundamentally different. Like, the U.S. and Afghanistan is a fundamentally different prospect than Ukraine in Ukraine, and Pakistan, influencing Afghanistan is very different than Russia influencing Russia's attack on Ukraine. So it's like a fundamentally different problem, but the U.S. is like applying this logic for some reason that I really don't understand it. Maybe Colby can talk about it.
I don't know that is a long-standing policy. I mean, as you said, obviously the situation in Afghanistan was totally different. I mean, that was U.S. forces directly involved in their own war. This is just Ukraine fighting for themselves, not asking for anybody else to really come in and fight the war for them. They're just asking for weapons. So there may be some sort of continuity of thought there with regard to the way that the Obama administration approached that question in Afghanistan. I mean, obviously he ultimately authorized American forces to go into Pakistan to kill bin Laden. So it's not that U.S. forces never did operate in Pakistan. But in this case, I think it's quite clear. I mean, they've been pretty honest that they just believe that it is too much of an escalation risk. And slowly but surely that has been chipped away at. There was really not a whole lot of, it was not a very compelling case that they had to begin with, but over the course of 3 years of war almost now, it just became even more absurd with every passing day. And now the president has reportedly taken it a step further, but we still don't really know what exactly the new policy is. We just have people on the NSC presumably leaking to the press saying that, yeah, we're changing the policy, but there's still a lot of confusion with some people saying that, oh no, well, it's only still going to apply to Kursk Oblast only, and that's all very uncertain, and we're not going to have certainty with that until we see the Ukrainians actually start conducting some fire missions. So it remains to be seen exactly what they're going to allow. I'd be very surprised if it is a blanket, yeah, Ukraine, do whatever you want to. I think that's probably unlikely. There's probably still going to be some sorts of strings attached somehow. And again, that will hopefully we'll kind of get a better understanding of what the new terms and conditions look like over the coming weeks.
Do you guys find funny the fact that we see since years the rhetoric that Russia is holding, is not using all his potential, while technically the one that have a lot of limits to use even what we give is the Ukrainians. I mean, it's 3 years that the Russians are doing strategic campaigns against the infrastructure of Ukraine, and we don't allow the Ukrainians to do the same. Who have more limits in that sense, a strategic balance, what one country can do to the other to diminishing its war effort is completely unbalanced towards Russian favor.
Yeah, I don't know if it was for Colby, this question.
No, in general, in the sense, all these red lines, self-imposed by us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sorry if I step in abruptly. To reply it immediately to Mirko, yeah, I totally agree. I think Ukraine, since day one, has been fighting with probably both hands tied. Sometime Ukraine have done, of course, mistake. We have been discussed plenty of stuff regarding the counteroffensive, but one of the rhetoric that Mirko probably knows better than anyone apart me, because I'm not anymore in Italy, but I listen a lot of propaganda in Italy. There were a lot of people, even not propaganda, people that still thinking, oh no, well, Russia is retaining. Russia is not retaining at all. They start to use Kinzhal missile, which, okay, we can discuss technically is not an hypersonic weapon, is exactly, but they were using very good weapon where they needed and when they had. For example, the story about the FPV drone, oh, they are just retaining. No, when they have a capability, they use it. Look at the FAB. As soon as they manage to how to produce, how to mass produce, how to counter all the problems, they use en masse. So this is a fallacy. This is propaganda. This is someone. If someone is an analyst and tell you your enemy is retaining and doesn't give you circumstances, because retaining resources is something that armies do, but only for a specific portion of a front, of a specific reason. That's they don't do, oh well, I don't want to be too strong, and then
let's not win too quick.
Yeah, it is completely no sense, because even Russia, even US has finite resources. This thing that an army cannot spend out its own storage is completely false. If things goes bad, you can get in very big trouble. So Russia is going to use, of course, resources for example, we discussed privately last time with you, Mirko, and this was correct. Cruise missile. They didn't use Stint yesterday, and they used, because they have and they will continue to use, because they have that resource. They know that they need to do certain things, and they will continue to do that. Instead, Ukraine had some opportunity to use this weapon, but these were not allowed, or was not done in time, or not at the best moment. Think about IFVs and all the stuff that they got for the summer offensive. If we were able to give them these immediately, even without as much training, Kharkiv offensive would be much deeper, much effective. So it's all situational, and I think this is a problem. I don't know if it's a problem of culture or is a problem of training of many analysts, but Russia is using resources as much as they need and as much they have.
I hope we not bring big unluckiness to this story, because yesterday when we closed the call and say, I'm pretty sure they're going to start again their strategic.
No, but I think it makes sense. Because if they are producing missile, they are doing that.
They are doing the production.
Why they not?
They don't have enough to a continuous campaign, so they hold for a certain amount of months, usually between the summer and the winter, and then they have a brief campaign again, which they can sustain. Probably it will be bigger than the other one, but 5-6 big attacks, that's what they can sustain, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think what all matters is how much missile Ukraine has and how much defenses against cruise missile, because cruise missile do not need Patriots. So that's the other important point. And to going back to the Kaufman statement, which I knew about, I think Kaufman is and ever say this lightly, but I think Kaufman is a bit wrong in what he say, because the main problem is that it's true that if you do something with the precise timing, the effect could be much larger. And this is the same reason why I saw a lot of OSINT people ranting, oh, why all these bridges didn't went down? Because if you destroy those bridges today, it has nothing, may help a little bit for a few weeks, but then Russia know how to repair bridge, Russia know how to go around bridge, and you can always find a new route. So sometimes some targets are good to be attacked and destroyed in a certain specific time. Today we had discussed about Kursk. Think about those bridges that were destroyed, and even the pontoon were destroyed immediately after. That was a specific support of a maneuver on Koronevo. They were thinking, if we take Koronevo and then we can push further, eliminating those bridges will reduce the capability of the Russian. But then things played in a different way and they stopped. In fact, they are not bombing them anyway. And I think, and just to conclude, that there are a lot of things that can be done, especially on the logistic. Now, and the image that is not made by me is made by a Polish analyst. I should have also the Polish translate to English, but essentially you can see that they made an effort to try to track down how the logistic of Russian army works at different tiers. And essentially you can see that there is a tier between 0, so front line to 85 kilometers, near front, 85, 150, and then the deep one, which is 150 and 300. And then, of course, there is stuff even behind that. So if Ukraine is able to start to point at this stuff behind the range of HIMARS, especially because now Russia has been more inclined to divide those ammo depot to avoid those very large stockpile that were hidden in the first few months and the first year of war.
Daniele, I made a video. Remember when the HIMARS arrived and the Russian started losing deposits everywhere? And I made, I think, a brave video for the time saying the HIMARS effect is a placebo effect. In the sense, if you think the Russian will keep continuing being stupid and making these huge deposits, you're really wrong. And also they consume. The Ukrainians in 4 months pretty much consumed the production of a year in terms of HIMARS missiles used. So it was not possible to continue with that system. So they divide into small deposits, in Italiano, diciamo, pollicino effect, you know?
But I think it was logical, and I think any army would have done that. And at the time, that was required to try for that period of time. Exactly, is not even a placebo. Is a temporary solution, because it was a temporary solution for a situation that was on the ground at the time. But situation changed, and now they have to strike deeper and deeper. And of course, this will have not the effect of canceling out the entire logistic of the Russian army, but will oblige them to move even further. And this will stretch much more their logistic and will hamper and slow down their capability. So just for this, and I don't want to go in other type of target, this will be beneficial. It's not going to change the entire war from day to night, but it is an help that you give to who is fighting on the front line. So sorry, this doesn't want to look like a rant. I'm trying to run to save time. So I think that giving this capability to Ukraine, it's very important, because it gives them more option to play with rather than being limited to not very short, but short range attack.
Also because it's very easy to predict for the Russian what the Ukrainians can do or not do. Or they can't hit, after this red line, fine, we move all the air force just 100 kilometers back and they can do anything about it. Thank you for the information, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Increasing the dilemma. What's
Yep.
going to be the next target? Essentially. Sorry, I'm done.
So I know that Mirko needs to leave. It's super late. I hope you can. I hope you had some dinner at some point tonight. I know you had a
No, I
stream
still
before.
need to eat,
No.
but I like it, but it's not for me. It's for my girlfriend, because if it was for me, I was here for another 2-3 hours. But
Shh. So thank you so much, Mirko. I really want to have you back, because this is a great conversation on not really one topic, but that's fine. We went over a lot of different topics, and it was a really good conversation. So thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you all. To the next time.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. And also thank you to Andrew, to Gesh, to Road to Mars, even if he didn't manage to ask his question, and everyone else that joined. So do we have any other things you want to talk about? There's been lots of questions in the chat, but I don't think we have...
I think if we wait another 20 minutes, we reach the longest live ever.
Yeah.
Maybe did we miss any questions? Maybe we can hit them next week.
Yeah. Okay. So to the people in the back end that are screening the questions, please, make a list of them, and then we'll get back to them next Sunday, I guess. Sorry to chat that we didn't answer all the questions.
And thank you everyone for staying with us until now, because 3 hours and 41 minutes. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really great panel. I really enjoyed that discussion. I think you guys covered a lot of ground. Great guests. I mean, you obviously welcome back on anytime. Love to hear from him. Yeah, I mean, I guess we wrap up then?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, thanks to our audience, of course, for if you guys managed to hang out for the whole thing. I really appreciate that. 3 hours and 40 minutes of top tier Ukraine analysis, I must say. So yeah, thanks guys for tuning in live. Thanks, of course, to people who watch the video later. Yeah, probably maybe a little more convenient to watch a massive 3 hour and 40 minute show over maybe a couple of chunks on demand. So I can respect that. Also, of course, thanks to our great panel. Thanks to all the guys in the basement for coming to visit us. Thank you, Andrew, for extending the length of their chains temporarily to permit them to come on our show. And now they're, of course, all back to work in the basement. And thanks, of course, to Andrew for stopping by. He does his own streams. Andrew, are you streaming on a regular time these days?
Absolutely not. The complete random.
Okay, no worries. So definitely check out Andrew's map. I don't know. I'll post a link or something later. And whenever Andrew streams, if you subscribe to him on the YouTube, they'll let you know. The good people at YouTube will let you know, maybe if they feel like it. Maybe hit the bell. I don't know how any of that works. Anyway, guys, thanks to, of course, all of our special guests. Thanks to Mirko for stopping by. Parabellum. Really great, again, as I said, to have him on. But thanks, of course, to our regular panel, German Aid to Ukraine, Daniele, Colby, and Erlend for holding down the fort as we always do. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in this week. We'll see everyone next week, I think, for a normal 2-hour stream. Same time, 2100 Kyiv time every Sunday. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
Heroям slava.